The rain drummed against the glass walls of the Reid Energy Solutions building like accusations Elena Vasquez couldn't ignore. She stood in the shadow of a mesquite tree across the street, watching the lone figure hunched over a computer screen on the 15th floor. The building should have been empty at 2:47 a.m., but Connor Reid was still there, still working, still part of the machine that had killed her mother. Elena pulled her jacket tighter against the October chill. Austin's downtown gleamed with the artificial promise of progress, but she saw only the pollution hidden behind the chrome and glass. Tomorrow she would walk into that building, not as the daughter of a woman who died gasping for clean air, but as a professional, a collaborator. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother Miguel. "You sure about this, Hermana sleeping with the enemy and all that?" She typed back, "Not sleeping with anyone, just doing my job." But as she watched Connor Reid lean back in his chair, running his hands through dark hair, Elena wondered if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. Or her life. The University of Texas Energy Research Center smelled like fresh paint and old coffee, a combination that made Elena's stomach clench as she walked through the glass atrium. Her heels clicked against polished concrete, each step a countdown to confrontation. The folder in her briefcase contained everything she needed to destroy Connor Reid's credibility, but first she had to survive 12 weeks of pretending they were on the same side. Dr. Margaret Foster's office occupied a corner of the third floor with windows that overlooked the Texas state capitol. Elena had done her research on Foster, too, environmental science PhD from MIT, former EPA administrator, and according to rumor, the only person in Austin who could make oil executives and tree huggers sit in the same room without bloodshed. Sinister Vasquez, punctual as always. Dr. Foster looked up from her computer, her silver hair catching the morning light. "Coffee, you'll need oil for what's coming. I'll take whatever gets me through this without committing a felony." Foster laughed a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I admire your honesty, though I should warn you Mr. Reid has been here for 20 minutes already reviewing your organization's latest report on groundwater contamination in East Austin." Elena's jaw tightened. Of course he had. How much does he know? About the lawsuit, everything that matters. About you personally, that remains to be seen. The door opened before Elena could respond, and Connor Reid walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that could have melted steel. He was taller than she'd expected from his corporate headshots, broader through the shoulders, with green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail about her in the space of a heartbeat. "Ms. Vasquez." His voice carried the slow honey of East Texas, but there was steel underneath. "I brought you coffee. Black, no sugar. Seemed appropriate." Elena accepted the cup, noting that his fingers were stained with ink and his sleeve had a small burn mark that suggested late nights in a lab. "How thoughtful. I brought you something, too." She set her briefcase on Foster's desk and withdrew a thick folder. "Discovery documents from Vasquez versus Reid Energy Solutions. Perhaps you've seen them before." Connor's expression didn't change, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I have. Interesting reading, though I noticed some gaps in your environmental impact assessment. Such as, the part where you acknowledge that our East Austin facility has been offline for 8 months while we retrofit it with new filtration systems." He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo, and turned it toward her. "That's me last Tuesday installing the final carbon capture unit with my own hands." Elena studied the image, Connor in work clothes, covered in grease, surrounded by complex machinery she didn't recognize. It wasn't what she'd expected from a petroleum engineer who'd grown up with oil money. Nice PR stunt. It's not PR when there's no camera crew. Connor pocketed his phone. "But I understand your skepticism. Your mother died because companies like mine cut corners on safety. I'd hate us too." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd expected corporate doublespeak, legal deflection, maybe even aggression. She hadn't expected him to mention her mother with something that sounded almost like respect. Dr. Foster cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should discuss the parameters of your collaboration before you kill each other." Elena forced her attention back to the older woman, though she remained acutely aware of Connor's presence beside her. He smelled like motor oil and something clean soap or shampoo that reminded her of rain. "The Clean Energy Transition Plan," Foster continued. requires both of your organizations to develop a comprehensive strategy for reducing carbon emissions in Texas by 40% over the next decade. You have 12 weeks to produce a viable framework that satisfies both environmental groups and energy companies. Impossible, Elena said. Agreed, Connor added. Foster smiled. Excellent. You found your first point of consensus. Their assigned workspace was a conference room on the fifth floor with a view of Lady Bird Lake and walls covered in whiteboards that someone had optimistically labeled Collaboration Zone. Elena claimed the chair facing the door never turn your back on the enemy, while Connor set up his laptop at the opposite end of the table. For the first hour, they worked in silence, broken only by the scratch of Elena's pen and the soft clicking of Connor's keyboard. She was reviewing EPA regulations when he suddenly spoke. Your mother was Maria Santos Vasquez. Elena's pen stilled. Was. She testified before the State Environmental Commission in 2013. I watched the hearing online. Connor's voice was quiet, careful. She was compelling. She was dying. Elena didn't look up from her notes. Lung cancer from breathing poison for 20 years. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence. No, it's not. Connor closed his laptop. The East Side chemical plant should have been shut down in 2015 when the first health reports came in. My father's company held contracts for waste disposal there. I recommended termination. I was overruled. Elena finally looked at him. And yet here you are still working for the same company. Someone has to change it from the inside. How noble. Elena's voice could have cut glass. Tell me how many more mothers have to dock while you work on your internal reform project. Connor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different roar. My brother Michael asked me the same question. 2 years ago, right before he put a gun in his mouth. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Elena felt her anger falter, replaced by something more complicated. I'm sorry, she said and meant it. He worked Platform 7 in the Gulf. When the new EPA regulations shut it down, 300 people lost their jobs overnight. Michael was a crew chief, felt responsible for every one of them. Connor stared out the window at the lake. He left a note saying he couldn't live with being part of the problem anymore. Elena set down her pen. Connor. The funny thing is he was wrong. Platform 7 was retrofitted 18 months later with new safety systems and clean extraction technology. It's running again now, employing 400 people and producing a third fewer emissions than before. But Michael never got to see it. Why are you telling me this? Connor looked at her directly, and Elena saw something in his green eyes that made her chest tight. Because I think you understand what it means to lose someone to this fight. And because if we're going to work together, you need to know that I'm not here to defend the status quo. I'm here to change it. Elena studied his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the corporate training that would explain this moment of vulnerability. She found none of it. Instead, she found something that scared her more than anger ever could, the possibility that Connor Reid might actually mean what he said. 12 weeks, she said finally. 12 weeks, he agreed, and then we go back to being enemies. Connor's smile was sad and complicated. If that's what you want. The East Austin neighborhood where Elena had grown up looked different in daylight, but not better. The houses were still too close together. The air still carried the chemical tang of the industrial district, and the children still played in yards where nothing green would grow. Connor parked his pickup truck, not the BMW she'd expected, outside the community center, where Elena's mother had organized health screenings in the months before her death. You don't have to do this, Elena said as they climbed out. The data's all in the reports. I've read the reports. Connor pulled an equipment case from the truck bed. Numbers tell one story, people tell another. Elena watched him check a handheld air quality monitor, his movements precise and professional. What's that for? Real-time particulate analysis. I want to see what we're actually dealing with here. They spent the morning walking the neighborhood, Connor taking readings, while Elena introduced him to residents who remembered her mother. Mrs. Garcia showed them the spot where her garden used to be before the plant started dying. James Fletcher, a Vietnam veteran, talked about the rash that appeared on his arms every summer when the wind shifted from the east. Connor listened to each story with the focus of a man taking confession, occasionally asking technical questions that surprised Elena with their insight. The readings are elevated, Connor said as they sat on the steps of the community center, reviewing data on his tablet. Particulate matter, sulfur compounds, benzene derivatives. But not critically high, not anymore. Not since the plant shut down last year, Elena said. But the damage was done over decades. Cancer doesn't care if the air is cleaner now. Connor nodded, scrolling through screens of data. The groundwater contamination is the real problem. It'll take years to remediate even with the best technology. Technology your company could have implemented 20 years ago. Yes. Connor didn't try to defend it. We could have. We should have. Elena studied his profile, the way his jaw tightened as he looked at the data. Why didn't you? Because clean technology costs money and dirty technology makes money. Because shareholders care more about quarterly profits than long-term consequences. Because it's easier to pay fines than prevent problems. Connor set down the tablet. Because people like me were more worried about keeping our jobs than doing them right. And now, Connor was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children play soccer in the dusty lot across the street. But now I know what it costs when we get it wrong. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the anger she'd carried for so long. It had become part of her skeleton. The new filtration systems you mentioned, they really work. Better than I hoped. 97% reduction in airborne toxins, 85% improvement in water quality downstream. Connor pulled up another screen on his tablet. Want to see the specifications? Elena leaned closer to look at the technical diagrams, close enough to smell that rain-clean scent again, to notice the small scar on his left hand that looked like it came from working with machinery. The filtration system was more sophisticated than anything she'd seen, combining multiple technologies in ways that seemed almost revolutionary. This is your design. Mostly, I've been working on it for 3 years. Connor's voice carried a note of pride she hadn't heard before. Started as a way to upgrade existing facilities without shutting them down. Preserve jobs while protecting health. Why haven't I heard about this? Connor's expression darkened. Because the board of directors thinks it's too expensive to implement company-wide. They'd rather pay fines and legal settlements. Elena felt a spark of professional interest. What would it take to change their minds? Proof that clean technology can be profitable. A comprehensive plan showing long-term benefits. Political pressure from state and federal agencies. Connor looked at her meaningfully. A lawsuit that makes dirty operations more expensive than clean ones. Elena sat back, her mind racing. You want me to sue your company into compliance. I want you to help me save it. Connor closed the tablet. There's a difference, Washo. Elena found herself staying later at the research center, partly because the work was more complicated than she'd expected, and partly because she was beginning to understand that Connor Reid was not the man she'd thought he was. Tonight she was alone in the collaboration room when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Connor appeared in the doorway carrying Chinese takeout and wearing the expression of someone who'd been debating with himself. I brought enough for 2 in case you were hungry. Elena looked at the clock, 9:30 p.m. She'd been working for 12 hours straight and couldn't remember her last meal. That's thoughtful. Lo mein and orange chicken. I asked Miguel what you liked. Elena's head snapped up. You talked to my brother. He's designing the graphics for our preliminary report. Didn't you know? Connor set the food on the conference table. He's talented. The visualizations he created for carbon sequestration are remarkable. Elena felt a flutter of something that might have been betrayal. Miguel hadn't mentioned working with Connor. When did this happen? Dr. Foster connected us last week. She thought his artistic background might help translate complex data into accessible formats. Connor unpacked containers of food, the smell making Elena's stomach growl audibly. He's been asking a lot of questions about petroleum engineering, curious about the science behind the politics. Miguel's always been curious about everything. Elena accepted a container of lo mein, trying to process this information. What did you tell him? The truth, that oil extraction can be done responsibly with the right technology and oversight. That renewable energy alone can't meet current demand without massive infrastructure changes that will take decades. That the transition has to be managed carefully, or we'll end up with energy shortages that hurt poor communities first. Elena took a bite of lo mein, surprised by how hungry she was. That's not the party line for either of our sides. Maybe that's the problem. Connor settled into the chair across from her with his own food. Maybe the party lines are wrong. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar food somehow making the sterile conference room feel more intimate. Elena found herself studying Connor's hands as he used chopsticks with surprising skill, the calluses from manual labor, the careful precision of his movements. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Shoot. Why petroleum engineering? With your family's money, you could have done anything." Connor set down his chopsticks. "You know about the money. I know your great-grandfather struck oil in 1943, and your family has been in the business ever since. I know your father owns half the mineral rights in East Texas. I know you grew up in a house that probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime." "River Oaks," Connor said. 27 rooms, 2 pools, staff quarters, for people whose names I never learned." His voice was neutral, but Elena caught the undercurrent of something that might have been shame. "I hated every inch of it. Because of the environmental impact. Because it was built on other people's suffering." Connor pushed rice around his container with obvious discomfort. "You want to know why I became an engineer? Because when I was 12, I watched a documentary about the Exxon Valdez spill. Saw the pictures of birds covered in oil, dead fish washing up on beaches, fishermen crying because their livelihoods were destroyed. And I asked my father how that happened." Elena waited, sensing there was more. He said it was the cost of progress, that modern civilization required sacrifice, and some people had to bear the burden so others could prosper. Connor met her eyes. "I decided that day that if I was going to be part of this business, I was going to figure out how to do it without killing things. And your father supported that." Connor's laugh was bitter. "My father thinks clean technology is a liberal conspiracy to destroy American energy independence. We haven't agreed on much of anything since I graduated college." Elena felt a familiar ache, the complicated love for family members whose choices she couldn't support. "It's hard when the people who raised you become the people you have to fight. Miguel told me about your father, that he worked for Chevron before he met your mother." Elena stiffened. "Miguel talks too much. He loves you. He's worried about you." Connor's voice was gentle. "He said you've been carrying anger for so long, you don't know how to put it down." "Maybe I don't want to put it down. Maybe anger is what keeps me fighting. And maybe fighting is what keeps you from living." The words hung between them like a challenge. Elena felt her defenses rising, the familiar urge to retreat behind sarcasm and professional distance. But something in Connor's expression stopped her, a vulnerability that matched her own. "My mother used to sing while she cooked," Elena said suddenly. "Mexican folk songs her grandmother taught her. The house always smelled like cumin and cilantro. Even after she got sick, even when she could barely breathe, she tried to sing." Connor waited, not rushing her. "The last time I heard her voice, she was in the hospital bed, oxygen mask over her face, trying to hum a lullaby she used to sing when I was little. She couldn't get enough air to make the notes, but she kept trying." Elena's voice cracked. "She died trying to sing." "Elena," Connor's voice was soft. "I was supposed to protect her. I was the one with the law degree, the one who understood the system. But I couldn't save her from the poison she'd been breathing for 20 years before I was even born. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I could have sued the chemical plant years earlier, could have organized the community, pushed for regulations, done something besides wait for the perfect case." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "By the time I acted, it was too late for her." Connor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Elena hadn't heard before. "Michael called me the night before he died. I was in Houston working late on a project that seemed important at the time. He said he needed to talk, asked if I could come home. I told him I'd call him back after my meeting." Elena's chest tightened. "I never called back. Got caught up in the technical specifications, lost track of time. By the time I remembered, it was 3 in the morning, and I figured he'd be asleep." Connor's hands were still on the table, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. "He shot himself at dawn. The note said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore, couldn't keep pretending the work we did didn't hurt people." "Connor, I'm sorry. The irony is he was wrong about Platform 7. The shutdown was temporary, the retrofit was successful. The new jobs were better than the old ones. If he'd waited 6 months, he would have seen that change was possible." Connor looked up at Elena. his green eyes bright with unshed tears. But I never got to tell him that. Never got to show him the plans I'd been working on, the technology that could have made everything different. Elena felt something crack open in her chest, a wall she'd built around her heart starting to crumble. We can't save the people we've already lost. No, but maybe we can save the ones we haven't lost yet. They sat in silence as Austin's lights twinkled through the windows, two people who had found each other across the divide of their grief. Elena realized that at some point during the evening, the space between them had stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like something else entirely. Something that scared her more than any courtroom ever had. A cinematic love story. Elena arrived at the research center the next morning to find Connor already in the collaboration room, staring at his laptop screen with the intensity of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it, and there were coffee stains on the papers scattered across the table. "Rough night," she asked, setting down her own coffee and noting the dark circles under his eyes. Connor looked up, his expression grim. "Someone leaked our preliminary report to the Austin Business Journal." Elena felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean leaked?" Connor turned his laptop toward her. The headline read, "Oil Heiress and Environmental Lawyer's Secret Romance, Politics Makes Strange Bedfellows." Below it was a grainy photo of them leaving the East Austin Community Center together, Elena's hand briefly touching Connor's arm as they walked to his truck. "Oil heiress," Elena read the article with growing horror. "They called me an oil heiress because my father worked for Chevron 20 years ago. And secret romance, we were doing field work." "Keep reading," Connor said grimly. Elena scrolled down, her anger building with each paragraph. The article painted their collaboration as a romantic entanglement that compromised both their professional judgment and their political principles. It quoted unnamed sources from both the environmental community and the oil industry, expressing concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Worst of all, it suggested that their relationship was part of a larger conspiracy to undermine legitimate activism. "This is character assassination." Elena said, her hands shaking slightly as she set down the laptop. "Who would do this? Someone who benefits from keeping us divided." Connor ran his hands through his hair. "The question is whether it's someone from your side or mine." Elena's phone buzzed with text messages, then buzzed again and again. She glanced at the screen to see notifications from colleagues, friends, her boss at the environmental law clinic, all asking versions of the same question: what the hell is going on? "I have to call my office," Elena said, already dialing. Sofia Martinez, Elena's mentor and the clinic's senior partner, answered on the first ring. "Elena, thank God. Tell me this article is complete bullshit." "It's complete bullshit," Elena said automatically, then hesitated. "The romance part anyway. We are working together on the transition plan." "Working together how?" "Because the board is asking questions I can't answer without more information." Elena glanced at Connor, who was dealing with his own phone crisis. "Sophia, the project is legitimate. We're making real progress on finding common ground between environmental protection and economic reality." "Common ground," Sophia's voice rose. "Elena, this is the same company that killed your mother. The same family that's been poisoning communities for decades. What kind of common ground could you possibly find?" Elena felt the familiar surge of defensive anger, but underneath it was something new, a reluctance to paint Connor with the same brush as his father's company. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Elena struggled to find words that would explain the past few weeks without sounding like she'd lost her mind. "The technology exists to make fossil fuel extraction clean and safe. Connor's been developing systems that could eliminate most environmental damage while preserving jobs and energy security. If we can prove it's economically viable—" "Connor," Sophia's voice was sharp. "Since when do you call him Connor?" Elena realized her mistake too late. "Since we started working together professionally." Elena listened to me very carefully. "I've known you for 5 years. I've watched you tear apart oil executives in depositions without breaking a sweat. I've seen you make grown men cry when they tried to explain away environmental damage. You don't get friendly with the enemy." "He's not the enemy." The words came out before Elena could stop them, and the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Elena," Sophia said finally, her voice gentle but firm, I need you to come in this afternoon. We need to discuss your continued involvement in this project. Elena's chest tightened. Sophia, you can't pull me from this. We're too close to a breakthrough. I can and I will if I think your judgment has been compromised. See you at 2. The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. Bad news, Connor asked, hanging up his own call. My boss thinks I've been compromised. Yours. My father wants to see me immediately. Apparently, the board of directors is concerned about my public association with radical environmentalists. Connor's smile was bitter. Funny how quickly we both became liabilities. Elena sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. Maybe we should call it quits. Go back to our respective corners and pretend this never happened. Is that what you want? Elena looked at him, really looked at him. The man who'd brought her coffee and listened to her talk about her mother, who'd shown her technology that could change everything and trusted her with his brother's story, who'd spent his own money retrofitting facilities while his father's company fought environmental regulations in court. No, she said quietly, it's not what I want. Then we keep going, even if it costs us our jobs. Connor's smile was sad but determined, especially then. The meeting with Sophia went exactly as Elena had feared. The Environmental Law Clinic's conference room felt like a tribunal, with Sophia and 2 board members sitting across from Elena like judges preparing to deliver a verdict. The afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed harsh, unflattering, revealing every doubt and conflict on Elena's face. The article changes things, said Dr. Robert Chen, the board's environmental science advisor. Our donors are asking questions about the clinic's commitment to its mission. Our mission is environmental justice. Elena said, her voice steady despite the anxiety clawing at her chest. The transition plan serves that mission. Does it? Sophia leaned forward, her expression concerned but unyielding. Or does it serve Connor Reid's mission to rehabilitate his family's image while continuing business as usual? Elena felt a flash of anger. You don't know him. And you do. After 3 weeks, Sophia's voice was sharp. Elena, I've seen this before. Charismatic men from powerful families who know exactly how to appeal to idealistic women. They make you feel special, like you're the one person who truly understands them. And this isn't about manipulation, Elena said, though even as she spoke, she wondered if Sophia might be right. The technology is real. The environmental benefits are measurable. The economic projections are sound. According to Reid Energy Solutions, Dr. Chen pointed out, have you had independent verification of their claims? Elena hesitated. She'd been so focused on working with Connor that she hadn't thought to verify his data through external sources. I've seen the test results myself, from their facilities using their equipment analyzed by their labs. Sophia shook her head. Elena, you're smarter than this. You know better than to take corporate claims at face value. The 3rd board member, Maria Santos, a longtime activist who'd known Elena's mother, spoke for the first time. Mija, your mother would be heartbroken to see you working with these people. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. My mother wanted justice. If we can get real environmental protection and real economic benefits from the same solution, there is no solution that benefits both sides equally, Maria interrupted. There are winners and losers, and in this game, communities like ours are always the losers. You know this. Elena felt the walls closing in the weight of expectation and tradition and political purity pressing down on her shoulders. These were her people, her allies in the fight that had defined her adult life. But increasingly, that fight felt like shadowboxing, attacking enemies who might not be enemies, defending positions that might not be defensible. I need time to think, Elena said finally. Sophia nodded. Take the weekend. But Elena, understand that if you continue with this project, it will be without the clinic's support and without mine. Elena left the meeting feeling like she'd been cut loose from everything that had anchored her identity for the past 5 years. The drive back to the research center took her through the East Austin neighborhood, where her mother had died, past the community center where Connor had listened to stories of chemical burns and cancer clusters with genuine horror in his eyes. She found him in the collaboration room, staring out the window at Lady Bird Lake. He'd changed into jeans and a work shirt, and there was grease under his fingernails that suggested he'd been working with machinery again. How did it go? He asked without turning around. About as well as yours, I'm guessing. Connor's laugh was humorless. My father threatened to cut off my funding if I don't publicly distance myself from radical environmental activists. The board voted to suspend my access to company resources pending a review of my recent associations. Elena felt a stab of guilt. Connor, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to affect your work. It's not your fault. Connor finally turned to face her. It's mine for thinking I could change a system from the inside while keeping my hands clean. What will you do? Keep working. The technology doesn't belong to Reid Energy Solutions. The patents are in my name. If they won't support clean extraction, I'll find someone who will. Elena studied his face, looking for signs of bravado or false confidence. Instead, she saw determination mixed with something that looked like relief. You're not upset about losing their support. I'm upset about wasting 3 years trying to convince people who don't want to be convinced. Connor walked to the whiteboard where they'd mapped out their preliminary framework. But I'm not upset about being free to do the right thing without asking permission. Elena felt something click into place, a recognition that the man standing before her was exactly who he'd claimed to be, someone willing to sacrifice comfort and security for principle. My clinic wants me to abandon the project. And I'm going to I'm to tell them no. Connor's smile was like sunrise after a long night, even if it costs you everything. Elena thought about her mother singing lullabies with failing lungs, about Miguel designing graphics that translated scientific data into art, about communities that deserved clean air and good jobs and a future that didn't require choosing between survival and principle. Especially then, she said. Elena spent Saturday morning in her apartment, surrounded by legal documents and environmental reports trying to verify Connor's claims about the new filtration technology. She'd called in favors from contacts at the EPA, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and 3 independent testing laboratories. The responses she received over the course of the day painted a picture that was both encouraging and troubling. The technology was real. Multiple independent tests confirmed Connor's claims about emission reductions and water quality improvements. But the implementation was limited. Only 2 facilities in Texas had actually installed the new systems, and both were owned by Reid Energy Solutions. Every other major oil company in the state was still using decades-old technology that produced the kind of pollution that had killed Elena's mother. More concerning was what she learned about the political resistance to adoption. A leaked internal memo from the Texas Oil and Gas Association revealed active lobbying against state requirements for clean technology implementation. The memo, dated 3 months earlier, specifically mentioned Connor Reid as a problem, whose misguided environmental advocacy threatened to impose unnecessary costs on the entire industry. Elena was still processing this information when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her brother's name. Miguel, what's up? Hermana, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the studio? Something in Miguel's voice set off alarm bells. Is everything okay? Just come over, please. Elena found Miguel in his art studio, a converted warehouse space in East Austin that he shared with half a dozen other artists. He was standing in front of a large canvas, but instead of his usual vibrant murals, this painting was stark black and white, showing 2 figures standing on opposite sides of a chasm while a bridge burned between them. New piece, Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew what it represented. I've been thinking about compromise, Miguel said, not looking away from the painting. About what happens when you try to build bridges between people who don't want to be connected. Elena studied her brother's profile. At 26, Miguel still had the lean build and restless energy of the teenager who'd spray-painted environmental slogans on abandoned buildings. But his eyes held a weight that hadn't been there before their mother's death. Miguel, what's this about? Connor Reid came by yesterday, after his meeting with his father. Elena felt a chill. What did he want? To apologize for the article, for the backlash you're facing, for putting you in an impossible position. Miguel finally turned to face her. He also brought me something. Miguel walked to his desk and picked up a folder. Inside were technical drawings, patent applications, and financial projections, all related to Connor's clean extraction technology. He's giving me the patents, Miguel said. All of them, no strings attached. Elena stared at the documents, her mind racing. Miguel, these are worth millions of dollars. He knows. He said his family will never implement the technology voluntarily and he can't do it alone. But he thinks we can. Miguel's smile was nervous but excited. He wants to license the patents to a nonprofit organization, something that can work directly with communities to implement clean technology while sharing the profits with the people who've been harmed by pollution. He called it environmental justice through economic empowerment. Elena felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet again. Miguel, this is insane. We don't know anything about running an energy company. We know about organizing communities. We know about fighting for justice. And now we know someone who understands the technology. Miguel's eyes were bright with possibility. Elena, we could actually change things, not just sue companies after they poison people, but prevent the poisoning in the first place. And Connor, what does he get out of this? Miguel's expression grew serious. A chance to honor his brother's memory by proving that environmental protection and economic development don't have to be enemies. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe a chance to be with you without it being a political scandal. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Miguel, I'm not blind, hermana. I've seen how you look at him, how he looks at you. You're falling for him. Elena wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat, because Miguel was right. Over the past few weeks, she'd stopped seeing Connor as the enemy and started seeing him as something much more dangerous, a man she could actually love. It doesn't matter how I feel, see, Elena said finally. We're from different worlds, different sides of an issue that's been my whole life. Maybe that's exactly why it matters. Miguel set down the folder. Elena, you've been fighting the same fight for so long, you've forgotten what you're fighting for. Connor could help you remember. Or destroy everything I've worked for. Miguel's smile was gentle. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save what matters most. Elena sat in her car outside the research center on Monday morning, staring at the building where she'd spent the past 3 weeks discovering that the world was more complicated than she'd believed. In her purse was a resignation letter addressed to Sophia, her formal withdrawal from the environmental law clinic. In her briefcase were contracts Miguel had drafted for the nonprofit organization Connor had proposed. And in her heart was a fear so profound it made her hands shake on the steering wheel. She was about to walk away from everything she'd built, everything she'd believed for a man she'd known for less than a month. A man whose family had profited from the same pollution that killed her mother. A man who could break her heart as easily as he'd changed her mind. But as Elena sat there, she thought about her mother's last words, not the desperate gasps for air, but the whispered advice she'd given Elena in the hospital bed the night before she died. Mija, Maria had said, her voice barely audible above the machines keeping her alive. Don't spend your life fighting ghosts. Fight for something better. Elena had assumed she meant fighting for environmental justice, for clean air and water for the communities that corporations had forgotten. But maybe her mother had meant something else. Maybe she'd meant fighting for a future where people like Connor and Elena didn't have to be enemies, where environmental protection and economic development could coexist, where love could bridge the gap between opposing sides. Elena took a deep breath, grabbed her briefcase, and walked into the building. She found Connor in the collaboration room, but he wasn't alone. Der Foster was there along with a woman Elena didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Elena, perfect timing. Dr. Foster smiled, but there was tension around her eyes. I'd like you to meet Rebecca Walsh from the Department of Energy. She's here to discuss the future of your project. Elena shook Walsh's hand, noting the firm grip and assessing gaze. Ms. Walsh, Ms. Vasquez, I've been following your work with great interest. Walsh settled back into her chair. The preliminary framework you and Mr. Reid have developed has caught the attention of some very important people in Washington. Elena glanced at Connor, who looked as surprised as she felt. I'm sorry about the clean energy transition plan you've outlined represents exactly the kind of bipartisan approach the administration has been seeking. Practical solutions that address environmental concerns without destroying economic stability. Walsh pulled out a tablet and scrolled to a document. We'd like to offer you federal funding to expand the pilot program nationwide. Elena felt the room spin slightly. Nationwide, $5 billion over 3 years with the possibility of renewal. Walsh's smile was sharp. Of course, such a program would require both of you to work together on a permanent basis. I understand there have been some political complications. Connor spoke for the first time. Ms. Walsh, we appreciate the interest, but Elena and I haven't even decided if we're continuing the current project. Oh, I think you have. Walsh stood gathering her materials. I've seen the preliminary data, Mr. Reid. Your technology works. I've read Ms. Vasquez's legal framework for implementation. It's brilliant, and I've watched you both fight for this project despite significant personal and professional costs. Walsh paused at the door. People who believe in something enough to sacrifice everything for it are exactly who we need leading this initiative. Think about it, but don't think too long. This opportunity won't last forever. After Walsh left, Elena and Connor sat in silence, the weight of possibility and responsibility settling between them like dust after an explosion. $5 billion, Elena said finally, for a nationwide program. That could change everything. Connor nodded. Everything. Elena looked at the man who had transformed from enemy to collaborator to something she didn't have words for. Connor, if we do this, if we take federal funding and expand nationally, there's no going back. We'd be committed to working together for years. I know. It would mean leaving our old lives behind. New careers, new identities, new everything. I know. Elena studied his face, searching for doubt or hesitation. Instead, she found the same quiet determination that had drawn her to him from the beginning. Are you sure? Connor's smile was soft and certain. Elena, 3 weeks ago, I thought the best I could hope for was incremental change within a broken system. Now I'm looking at the possibility of revolutionary change that could save lives and communities and maybe even the planet. He paused. But more than that, I'm looking at the possibility of building something with someone He stopped, the words hanging incomplete between them. Someone you... What? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Someone I love. The words hit Elena like a physical force. Not because they were unexpected, but because hearing them spoken aloud made everything real in a way it hadn't been before. Made her own feelings impossible to deny. Connor. She stood walking to the window that overlooked Lady Bird Lake. This is crazy. We barely know each other. We're from completely different worlds. A month ago, I was planning to destroy your company. A month ago, I was planning to ignore environmental activists and hope the problem would solve itself. Connor joined her at the window. Things change. Elena felt the last of her resistance crumble. If we do this, if we take the funding and build this program together, it has to be as equals. Full partners in everything. Agreed. And if it doesn't work out between us personally, we have to find a way to keep working together professionally. Agreed. And Connor, Elena turned to face him fully. I need you to know that I'm terrified. Connor's hands found hers warm and steady and real. So am I. Elena looked into his green eyes and saw her own hopes and fears reflected back at her. Saw the possibility of a future neither of them had imagined a month ago. Saw love growing in the space where hate used to live. Okay, she said, let's change the world. Connor's kiss was soft and tentative, a question rather than a statement. Elena answered by pulling him closer, by pouring all her hope and fear and desperate love into the space between them. When they broke apart, Austin stretched out below them like a promise. A city full of communities that deserve clean air and good jobs, a future that maybe, just maybe, they could help create together. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain that would wash the air clean and leave everything fresh and new. Elena thought of her mother's songs, of Connor's brothers, letters of all the people they'd lost and all the people they might still save. In 12 weeks, they'd gone from enemies to allies to something that transcended both. And this was only the beginning. 3 months after accepting the Department of Energy funding, Elena stood in the lobby of their new headquarters, a converted warehouse in East Austin that hummed with the energy of purpose and possibility. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the mural Miguel had painted on the exterior wall, a soaring eagle whose wings dissolved into wind turbines and solar panels with the words "Clean Energy, Clean Future" scripted in both English and Spanish below. The Vasquez Reid Clean Energy Initiative had grown from 2 people and a dream into a team of 30 engineers, lawyers, community organizers, and policy experts. But as Elena watched Connor explain carbon sequestration technology to a group of visiting senators, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were building something beautiful on unstable ground. The readings from the Corpus Christi pilot site exceeded our projections by 15%. Connor was saying, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd found his calling. Particulate emissions down 96%, groundwater contamination reduced by 88%, with no reduction in energy output. Senator Patricia Hawkins, the ranking Democrat on the Energy Committee, leaned forward with interest. And the economic impact on the local community? 230 new jobs in the first quarter alone, Elena said, stepping into the conversation. Average salary increase of 32% over traditional extraction jobs with full benefits and profit-sharing agreements. Senator James Morrison Hawkins, Republican counterpart, looked skeptical. Ms. Vasquez, these numbers sound almost too good to be true. What's the catch? Elena felt Connor's presence beside her, steady and reassuring. Over the past 3 months, they'd perfected this dance, his technical expertise balanced by her legal and political acumen, their obvious partnership lending credibility to claims that might seem impossible, coming from either side alone. The catch, Senator, is that change is hard, Elena said. Existing companies resist retrofitting because of upfront costs. Workers fear job losses during transition periods. Communities that have been poisoned for decades are suspicious of promises from people who look like us. Which is why, Connor added, we've built community ownership into the model from the ground up. Local residents own 40% of each facility with guaranteed employment and environmental oversight positions reserved for community members. Senator Morrison made notes on his tablet. And the federal investment protection, triple redundancy, Elena said without hesitation. Independent environmental monitoring, community oversight boards, and quarterly profit-sharing reports. If any facility fails to meet environmental standards, the community partners have the right to shut it down and claim full ownership of the assets. Senator Hawkins smiled. You've thought of everything. We've tried to, Connor said, but we're also learning every day. The communities we work with are our teachers as much as our partners. After the senators left, Elena and Connor retreated to their shared office, a glass-walled space that overlooked the main work floor. Elena kicked off her heels and sank into the leather chair Connor had insisted on buying, despite her protests about extravagance. They're going to approve the expansion, Connor said, loosening his tie as he settled behind his desk. Morrison was skeptical, but he couldn't argue with the numbers. Don't get overconfident, Elena warned, though she felt the same optimism. Politicians change their minds when the wind shifts. Connor's smile was soft. Even when you're agreeing with me, you sound like you're preparing for an argument. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was true, 3 months of working together hadn't entirely erased her instinct to treat Connor as an opponent. Professional hazard. Elena. Connor's voice carried a note she'd learned to recognize, the tone that meant he was about to say something that would make her pulse quicken. When was the last time we talked about something that wasn't work-related? Elena tried to remember. They'd been so focused on building the initiative, traveling to pilot sites, testifying before Congress, that their personal relationship had become oddly formal. They worked together, traveled together, appeared together at public events, but they hadn't been alone together, really alone, since that first kiss in the University Research Center. I don't know, she admitted. Have dinner with me tonight, somewhere that doesn't serve food in conference rooms or hotel restaurants. Elena's first instinct was to deflect, to mention the funding reports she needed to review, or the community meeting she was supposed to prep for. But something in Connor's expression made her pause. Connor, is everything okay? Everything's great. That's the problem. Connor walked to the window that overlooked the work floor where their team was busy changing the world. 6 months ago, we were enemies. 3 months ago, we were partners. Now we're what colleagues who occasionally hold hands at public events. Elena felt a familiar flutter of panic. We agreed to keep things professional while we built the initiative. We did, and we have. But Elena, at some point, don't we get to actually be together? The question hung between them like a challenge. Elena looked at the man who'd become her partner in every sense, except the one that mattered most, and realized she'd been hiding behind work for months, using their shared mission as an excuse to avoid the terrifying intimacy of actually being in love. Okay, she said quietly. Dinner, somewhere without conference rooms. Connor's smile could have powered their wind farm. I know just the place. The restaurant Connor chose was a tiny Mexican place in South Austin, the kind of neighborhood joint where the menu was handwritten in Spanish, and the salsa could strip paint. Elena felt overdressed in her work clothes, but Connor had changed into jeans and a button-down shirt that made his green eyes look like forest shadows. My abuela would have loved this place, Elena said, tasting the mole that reminded her of family dinners before her mother got sick. She always said you could judge a culture by how it treated its food. What was she like? Connor asked, twirling chile relleno around his fork with obvious enjoyment. Fierce, stubborn, absolutely convinced that any problem could be solved with enough prayer and the right recipe. Elena smiled at the memory. She came from Guanajuato with nothing but recipes written on index cards, built a catering business that put 3 kids through college. She sounds remarkable. She was. She's the one who taught me that fighting for justice isn't about being angry all the time. It's about loving something enough to protect it. Connor set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. I think I would have liked her. She would have been suspicious of you at first. Rich Anglo boy trying to date her granddaughter. Lena's smile was teasing. But she had a weakness for men who could cook. Can you cook? I make excellent scrambled eggs, and I can operate a grill without setting anything on fire. She would have been moderately impressed. They talked through dinner about families and memories, sharing stories that had nothing to do with oil or environmental law or the weight of changing the world. Elena learned that Connor had taught himself to play guitar during college, that he'd once spent a summer working construction in Costa Rica, that he'd never been to Europe, but dreamed of seeing the aurora borealis in Iceland. Connor discovered that Elena had majored in art history before law school, that she spoke 3 languages fluently, and could fake her way through 2 others, that she'd once wanted to be a documentary filmmaker, but decided law would let her create change instead of just recording it. Do you ever regret it? Connor asked as they shared flan that tasted like childhood. Choosing law over filmmaking? Elena considered the question. I used to think regret was a luxury I couldn't afford. But lately, she paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like criticism of the life she'd built. Sometimes I wonder what stories I might have told. Maybe you're telling one now, just in a different medium. What do you mean? Connor's smile was soft in the candlelight. What we're building, the initiative, the communities, the proof that enemies can become partners, that's a story. One that could change how people think about conflict and cooperation. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. When did you become such a philosopher? When I fell in love with a woman who sees the world in stories. The words were simple, honest, devastating. Elena felt her defenses crumble completely, leaving her raw and open and terrified. Connor, I know you're scared. I know this is complicated. I know we have 1,000 good reasons to keep this professional. Connor reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. But Elena, I'm tired of good reasons. I want you, not as a partner or a colleague or a political ally, as the woman I love. Elena stared at their joined hands, his tan and calloused from years of lab work, hers smaller and bearing the silver ring her grandmother had left her. Such different hands from such different worlds, but somehow they fit together perfectly. If we do this, she said quietly, if we really do this, it changes everything. I know. I'm supposed the media will have a field day. Our opponents will use it against us. Some of our supporters will feel betrayed. I know. Connor, I could lose everything again. The initiative, my reputation, my credibility in the environmental community. Connor's thumb traced across her knuckles, gentle and sure. Elena, you could also gain everything. A partner who believes in your vision. Someone to share the weight of changing the world. A love worth fighting for. Elena looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there, not the safe, predictable future she'd planned, but something wild and uncertain and full of possibility. Something worth the risk. Take me home, she said. Connor's smile was like sunrise. Which home? Elena's apartment was closer, but Connor's house had better coffee and a view of the lake. Elena's place had her grandmother's furniture and photos of her mother. Connor's had a workshop where he tinkered with clean energy prototypes and a garden where he grew vegetables with obsessive precision. Yours? Elena said, surprising herself. I want to see where you live when you're not trying to save the world. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and bacon sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. For a moment, she felt displaced, uncertain. Then memory flooded back Connor's hands in her hair, his whispered declarations, the way he'd made love to her, like she was something precious and fragile and strong all at once. She was in Connor's bedroom, wearing his MIT t-shirt with evidence of their passion scattered across the hardwood floor. Through the open door, she could hear him moving around the kitchen, humming something that sounded like a Mexican folk song her mother used to sing. Elena padded barefoot through Connor's house, noting details she'd missed the night before. Books on renewable energy, mixed with literary fiction on his shelves. Photographs from his construction work in Costa Rica, alongside family portraits that showed the wealth and privilege of his upbringing. A workshop table covered in sketches for new filtration designs, next to an easel holding a half-finished painting of Lady Bird Lake at sunset. "You paint," Elena said from the kitchen doorway. Connor looked up from the stove, his hair still messy from sleep-wearing jeans and nothing else. "Badly, it helps me think. The landscape is beautiful. It's the view from our office. I painted it the day after we got the federal funding." Connor turned back to the eggs, his shoulders tense with something that might have been embarrassment. "I know it's not very good." "Connor." Elena crossed the kitchen, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "It's beautiful because it means something to you. Because you see beauty in places where we're building something together." Connor relaxed against her, setting down the spatula to cover her hands with his. "I've been thinking about that painting for months. About what it means to create something beautiful in a place that used to be ugly." Elena pressed her face against his back, breathing in the scent of soap and sleep and possibility. "Is that what we're doing? Creating something beautiful?" "I hope so." They ate breakfast in Connor's deck, overlooking the lake, Austin's skyline glittering in the distance. Elena felt suspended between worlds, the professional life she'd built and the personal life she was just beginning to explore. The morning felt stolen precious, like something that couldn't last once the real world intruded. "What happens now?" she asked, watching a family of ducks navigate the water below. "Now we go to work and pretend we know what we're doing." Connor's smile was rueful. "Same as always, except now I know what you look like when you sleep." "I mean, what happens with us? Do we tell people? Keep it secret? Pretend last night didn't happen?" Connor set down his coffee mug, his expression growing serious. "Elena, what do you want to happen?" Elena thought about the question, about the life she'd imagined for herself and the life she was actually living. "I want to be with you, but I also want to protect what we've built professionally." "Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive, don't they? Look at what happened when the Journal wrote about us before we were even together. Imagine the reaction when they find out we actually are." Connor was quiet for a moment, watching the ducks dive for breakfast. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned before, but I was afraid it would change how you felt about the work we're doing." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What?" "The Department of Energy, funding Rebecca Walsh, specifically requested our partnership. Not just the technology, not just the legal framework. Us working together." Elena's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "She said the administration was looking for bipartisan approaches to environmental policy, that our relationship, professional relationship, represented exactly the kind of cooperation they wanted to promote." Connor met her eyes. "Elena, I think they were always planning for us to be together. Professionally, romantically, all of it." Elena felt the world tilt slightly. "You think the federal government orchestrated our relationship?" "No, but I think they saw the potential for it and decided to encourage it." Connor reached for her hand. "Elena, it doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change what we've built or the good we're doing. But you deserve to know." Elena pulled her hand away, her mind racing. "Connor, if that's true, if we're some kind of political science experiment, then everything we've done is compromised." "Why?" "Because powerful people recognize that our partnership could be effective. Because we weren't making free choices. We were being manipulated into a predetermined outcome." Connor's expression grew frustrated. "Elena, you're talking like we're puppets. Like we don't have agency or feelings or the ability to make our own decisions. Don't we look at the timeline, the university project, the leak to the media, Walsh showing up with funding at exactly the right moment? It's too convenient to be coincidence." Elena stood pacing to the deck railing. Below, the ducks had disappeared, leaving only ripples on the water's surface. God, I'm so stupid. I actually thought this was real. It is real. Connor's voice carried a note of desperation. Elena, whatever else is happening, what I feel for you is real. What we've built together is real. The communities we're helping are real. Elena turned to face him, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. How can I trust that? How can I trust anything when I don't know which choices were mine and which were someone else's agenda? Connor stood crossing the deck to stand in front of her. Because you know me. Because you've seen me work 18-hour days to perfect technology that could save communities like the one where your mother died. Because you've watched me choose you over my family's money and approval. Because last night when I made love to you, there was no political agenda in that room, except two people who found each other against all odds. Elena wanted to believe him. Every instinct, every feeling, every moment of connection they'd shared argued for trust. But the lawyer in her, the part that had been trained to see manipulation and hidden motives, couldn't let go of the doubt. I need time to think, she said finally. Connor's face fell. Elena, please, just give me some space to figure out what's real and what's not. Connor nodded though she could see it cost him. Okay, but Elena, don't let other people's agendas destroy something good. Don't let politics kill love. Elena kissed him goodbye, soft and desperate and final. As she drove home through Austin's morning traffic, she wondered if she was making the right choice or the only choice she could live with. Either way, it felt like another ending in a life that had already seen too many. Elena spent the next 3 days buried in research, using every contact and favor she could call in to trace the origins of their federal funding. What she discovered made her sick to her stomach and confirmed her worst fears about manipulation and political theater. The Department of Energy funding hadn't originated with Rebecca Walsh or even the current administration. It had been developed 2 years earlier by a bipartisan committee specifically looking for innovative approaches to environmental economic cooperation. The committee had commissioned studies on successful public-private partnerships, effective community engagement models, and the role of personal relationships in political coalition building. Connor Reid's name appeared in the research as early as 18 months ago, identified as a high-potential change agent within the petroleum industry, whose family connections and technical expertise could be valuable in the right circumstances. Elena's name had been added to the list 6 months later after her mother's death as a credible environmental advocate with strong community ties and personal motivation. The university research project that had brought them together wasn't Dr. Foster's idea. It had been suggested by a DOE liaison who had specifically requested Connor and Elena as participants. The media leak that had created their first crisis had come from someone with access to confidential government communications. Even Rebecca Walsh's perfectly timed appearance with funding had been planned weeks in advance. Elena was reviewing a leaked email chain when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Miguel's name. Hermana, where have you been? Connor's been calling everyone looking for you. Elena closed her laptop, suddenly exhausted. I've been working. Bullshit. Rachel Chen called me. She's been trying to reach you about some investigation she's doing. Miguel's voice carried a note of worry. Elena, what's going on? Elena's blood chilled. Rachel Chen was the reporter who'd written the original story about their romance. If she was investigating again? What kind of investigation? Something about federal funding and conflicts of interest. She wanted to know about the patents Connor transferred to you, about the timeline of your relationship, about whether either of you had contact with the government officials before the university project started. Elena felt the walls closing in. Miguel, whatever Rachel asks you, don't answer any questions without a lawyer present. Elena, you're scaring me. What's happening? Elena stared out her apartment window at the East Austin neighborhood where her mother had died, where she'd grown up believing in clear lines between right and wrong, good and evil, us and them. I think Connor and I are about to become a political scandal, and I think I might have walked us both into a trap. What kind of trap? Elena's laptop chimed with a new email. The sender was Deep Throat 2024, and the subject line read, "You're being watched." Against every instinct, Elena opened it. The email contained a single photograph, Connor and Elena having dinner at the Mexican restaurant, taken through the window with a telephoto lens. Below the image was a message. They know about the patents. They know about the funding timeline. They know about Walsh's real agenda. Get out now before you both go down. Elena's hands shook as she forwarded the email to her personal account and deleted it from her work system. Miguel, I have to go. Don't talk to any reporters. Don't talk to anyone except Connor if he calls. And Miguel, yeah, I love you, hermano. Whatever happens next, remember that. Elena hung up and immediately called Connor. He answered on the first ring. Elena, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. Connor, we need to meet. Somewhere private. Somewhere we can't be overheard. What's wrong? Elena looked at the anonymous email at the photograph of two people who thought they were falling in love but might have been performing for an audience they never knew existed. Everything. They met at Zilker Park after dark on a hiking trail far from streetlights and surveillance cameras. Connor arrived first, pacing nervously under the live oak trees that had sheltered Austin lovers for generations. When Elena appeared out of the shadows, his relief was palpable. Elena, I know you're angry about the funding, but someone's been watching us, Elena interrupted, showing him the anonymous email on her phone. Not just watching, documenting, photographing, building a case. Connor studied the image, his face grim in the phone's blue light. This was taken 3 nights ago, before I told you about Walsh's agenda, which means whoever sent this knew about the funding manipulation before we did. Elena pocketed her phone. Connor, I think we're being set up. I think someone wanted us together and now they want us destroyed. That doesn't make sense. Why would the same people who funded our initiative want to sabotage it? Elena had been asking herself the same question for hours. Because it was never about the initiative. It was about creating a story. Star-crossed lovers from opposite sides finding common ground, then being destroyed by scandal. A cautionary tale about why environmental and economic interests can't really be reconciled. Connor was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. You think someone wanted us to fail from the beginning. I think someone wanted to prove that bipartisan cooperation is impossible, that love can't overcome political differences, that people like us will always choose ideology over partnership when the pressure gets high enough. But who and why? Elena had theories, but they were dark and complicated and involved levels of political manipulation that made her feel naive for ever believing in good faith governance. Does it matter? The result is the same. Our credibility is shot, our relationship is compromised, and our work will be dismissed as the product of personal bias rather than professional expertise. Connor kicked at fallen leaves, his frustration evident in every movement. So what do we do? Abandon everything we've built. Let the communities we're helping suffer because someone else has an agenda. I don't know, Elena admitted. I've been trying to figure out an option that doesn't involve destroying either our work or ourselves. Have you found one? Elena's laugh was bitter. No, every scenario I can imagine ends with someone getting hurt. They walked in silence for a while, following the trail deeper into the park. Around them, Austin's night sounds created a symphony of normal life traffic on distant highways, music from backyard parties, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It felt surreal to discuss conspiracy and betrayal in such a peaceful setting. Elena, Connor said finally, whatever happens with the politics and the media and the investigation, I need you to know something. She waited, dreading whatever revelation was coming next. The night we first made love, when I told you I loved you, that wasn't performance. That wasn't manipulation or agenda or anything except a man who found someone worth fighting for. Connor stopped walking, turning to face her in the darkness. I don't care if powerful people encouraged our partnership. I don't care if we were part of someone else's plan. What I feel for you is mine. It belongs to no one else. Elena felt tears she hadn't realized she was holding back spill down her cheeks. Connor, how can you be sure? How can either of us be sure what's real when we've been living in a hall of mirrors? Because some things can't be faked. The way you look when you're solving a complex legal problem. The way you sing along with mariachi music when you think no one's listening. The way you fit against me when we sleep. Connor's voice was soft, certain. The way you make me want to be better than I am. Elena wanted to believe him. Every instinct argued for trust, for love, for the possibility that something real could survive, even if it had grown from artificial soil. But the stakes were too high, The consequences too severe. Connor, even if what we feel is real, it doesn't matter if no one else believes it. Our work depends on credibility. The communities we serve depend on political support. If we're seen as corrupt or compromised, then we find another way. Connor's voice carried a determination Elena recognized from their early days fighting over energy policy. We go independent. We work outside the system. We prove that clean energy and environmental justice don't need government approval or corporate backing. With what money? What resources? What infrastructure? Connor's smile was visible even in the darkness. With the patents I transferred to Miguel. With the community partnerships we've already built. With the knowledge that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. Elena stared at him, recognizing the man who'd been willing to give up his family's money for principle, who'd chosen moral clarity over professional safety. You want to walk away from $5 billion in federal funding. I want to walk away from anyone who thinks they can control our choices. Connor stepped closer, his hands finding her face in the darkness. Elena, I'd rather build something small and honest with you than something large and compromised for someone else. It would mean starting over. New organization, new funding sources, new everything. It would mean being free. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision. Everything they'd built over the past 6 months would be lost. Years of work relationships with communities, proof of concept that had taken months to establish. Gone. But maybe Connor was right. Maybe freedom was worth more than funding. Maybe love was worth more than political expedience. Maybe some things were too important to compromise. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. Connor's kiss was fierce and desperate and full of hope. When they broke apart, Elena felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff about to jump into darkness, with only trust to break her fall. Her phone buzzed with a text message. The sender was Rachel Chen. Elena, I have information you need to see. Meet me tomorrow. Come alone. Elena showed Connor the message. He frowned clearly, worried about more complications. It could be a trap, he said. Or it could be help. Elena pocketed the phone. Either way, we need to know what she knows. We go together. Connor. Elena, if we're doing this, if we're really choosing each other over everything else, then we do it together. No more secrets, no more isolation, no more protecting each other by staying apart. Elena looked at the man who'd become her partner in revolution, her co-conspirator in love, her ally in the fight for a future neither of them could build alone. Together, she agreed. As they walked back toward the parking area, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the exhilaration of burning bridges to build something better. Whatever came next would be theirs to choose, theirs to build, theirs to defend. For the first time since receiving the anonymous email, Elena allowed herself to hope. Rachel Chen looked nervous as she sat across from Elena and Connor in the back booth of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Austin. The reporter's usual confidence was replaced by something that looked almost like fear, and she kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting unwelcome visitors. I want to start by saying I'm sorry, Rachel said without preamble. The article I wrote about your relationship, it wasn't my idea. My editor assigned it, and he had very specific talking points he wanted me to include. Elena felt Connor tense beside her. Someone told you what to write. Not directly, but the story was framed from the beginning as a conflict of interest piece. I was given background information that painted your collaboration as suspicious, your personal relationship as compromising. Rachel pulled out a folder thick with documents. I didn't question it at the time because it made for good copy, but after the federal funding announcement, I started digging deeper. Elena glanced at Connor, seeing her own apprehension reflected in his eyes. What did you find? Rachel opened the folder, revealing emails, photographs, and what looked like surveillance reports. You were right to be paranoid. Someone has been orchestrating your relationship from the beginning, but it's not who you think. She slid a photograph across the table. Connor and Elena at their first university meeting, taken from outside Dr. Foster's office window. This was taken by a private investigator hired by Reid Energy Solutions, your father's company, Connor. Connor's face went pale. That's impossible. My father cut my funding months ago. Publicly, yes, but privately, Reid Energy has been documenting every aspect of your relationship, every detail of your collaboration, every piece of evidence that could be used to discredit both of you when the time was right. Rachel showed them more photographs, Elena leaving her apartment, Connor working late at the lab, the two of them having dinner at the Mexican restaurant. Your father never intended to support clean energy technology, but he recognized that you weren't going to give up on it. So he decided to let you build something successful and then destroy it publicly, along with your credibility and Elena's. Elena felt sick. Why, what does he gain from destroying his own son? Rachel's expression was grim. Control of the narrative. If Connor Reid, environmental advocate and clean energy pioneer, can be proven corrupt or compromised, it discredits the entire movement. If Elena Vasquez, environmental justice champion, chooses love over principle, it suggests that environmental lawyers can be bought or seduced. Connor was staring at the surveillance photos with something that looked like heartbreak. He's been planning this since the beginning. Not quite. The federal funding was legitimate. Rebecca Walsh really did believe in your work. But your father's company has been feeding information to congressional opponents of the initiative, building a case that the funding was awarded based on personal relationships rather than merit. Rachel spread out a series of emails between Reid Energy Solutions and various Republican senators, conservative think tanks, and oil industry lobbyists. The correspondence painted a clear picture of coordinated opposition to the clean energy initiative, with Connor and Elena's relationship as the weapon designed to bring it down. The plan was elegant, Rachel continued. Let you build something successful, document your personal relationship, then reveal it as evidence of corruption and bias. Destroy the initiative, discredit clean energy technology, and provide a cautionary tale about why environmental and economic interests can't be trusted to work together. Elena felt everything she'd believed about Connor, about their work, about the possibility of love surviving political pressure, crumble around her. How long have you known about this? 2 weeks. I've been trying to decide whether to publish the story or warn you first. Rachel's smile was rueful. Journalistic integrity versus human decency. What made you choose decency? Connor asked, his voice hollow. Because the story isn't about you, it's about manipulation and betrayal, and the lengths powerful people will go to maintain control. Rachel began gathering the documents. And because I think you deserve a chance to control your own narrative. Elena stared at the evidence of months of surveillance and manipulation, feeling violated and naive and furious. What happens now? Do you publish the story about the surveillance, or do they publish the story about our relationship? That depends on what you want to do. Rachel's expression was serious. I can publish the surveillance story, expose the manipulation, and shift the narrative from personal scandal to corporate corruption. But it means going to war with some very powerful people. Connor was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs of their private moments. When he spoke, his voice carried a cold fury Elena had never heard before. My father thinks he can destroy what we've built by proving it was based on personal feelings rather than professional merit. Yes, he's wrong. Connor looked up at Elena, his green eyes blazing with determination. What we've built is strong enough to survive scandal. The communities we serve know the difference between real results and political theater. The technology works regardless of who developed it or why. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a return of the confidence that had carried her through years of legal battles. He's also wrong about something else. Our relationship isn't a weakness that can be exploited. It's a strength that makes our work better. Rachel smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. So you want me to publish the surveillance story? Elena looked at Connor, seeing her own resolve reflected in his expression. They'd been manipulated, betrayed, used as pawns in someone else's game. But they'd also built something real, work that mattered, love that strengthened rather than compromised them, partnerships with communities that transcended political agendas. Publish it, Elena said. All of it. The surveillance, the manipulation, the corporate conspiracy to undermine clean energy development. Let people see what we're really fighting against. And our relationship, Rachel asked. That'll come out too, probably in more detail than you're comfortable with. Connor reached for Elena's hand across the table, his fingers warm and steady and certain. Let it. Let people see that love can make you stronger instead of weaker. Let them see that partnership across political divides is possible when it's built on honesty instead of manipulation. Elena squeezed his hand, feeling like they were about to walk into battle together. When do you publish? Rachel's smile was sharp. How about tomorrow morning? Give your father's people something to read with their breakfast, Connor. As they left the diner, Elena felt like she was shedding skin, the caution and fear and political calculation that had governed her life for so long. Tomorrow, their private relationship would become public knowledge. Their work would be scrutinized, their motives questioned, their every decision examined for evidence of bias or corruption. But tonight, for the first time in months, Elena felt free. Free from surveillance, free from manipulation, free from the weight of other people's agendas. Whatever came next, it would be their choice to make and their consequences to face. Together, Elena's phone started ringing at 5:30 a.m. before Rachel's story had even hit the major news outlets. By 6 a.m., there were reporters camping outside her apartment building. By 7 a.m., Connor's house was surrounded by news vans and camera crews. The headline in the Austin American-Statesman read, "Corporate Surveillance Scandal Oil Giant Spied on Son's Environmental Work." But the cable news networks had their own spin, love in the time of climate change, the romance that shook Washington. Elena sat in her car in the parking garage beneath the initiative's headquarters, reading the coverage on her phone. Rachel had done exactly what she'd promised. It exposed the surveillance, documented the manipulation, revealed the corporate conspiracy to undermine clean energy development. But the media's focus was predictably scattered. Some outlets treated it as a story about corporate overreach and political manipulation. Others focused on the romance angle, painting Elena and Connor as star-crossed lovers caught between family loyalty and professional duty. Still others questioned whether their relationship invalidated their work regardless of how it had been surveilled. The fact remains, Senator Morrison said in a CNN interview, Elena watched with growing dread that Ms. Vasquez and Mr. Reid developed a personal relationship while overseeing billions of dollars in federal funding. The American people deserve to know whether that relationship influenced their professional judgment. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "I'm in the parking garage, level B3. We need to strategize before we face the music." She found him leaning against his truck, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 31 years. "How bad is it?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "My father held a press conference an hour ago. He's calling for a congressional investigation into the federal funding process. He wants our contracts suspended pending a review of ethical violations and conflicts of interest." Elena felt her stomach drop. Connor, if they suspend the contracts, the pilot programs shut down. The communities we're working with lose their profit-sharing agreements, everything. "I know." Connor's voice was flat, defeated. "He's not just trying to destroy us. He's trying to destroy the communities that trusted us." Elena leaned against the truck beside him, feeling the weight of the unintended consequences. "This is my fault. I should have seen this coming. Should have been more careful." "Elena, none of this is your fault. My father manipulated both of us. The surveillance, the setup, all of it. But I let myself fall in love with you knowing the risks. I let personal feelings compromise professional judgment." Connor turned to face her, his green eyes fierce despite his exhaustion. "Elena, listen to me very carefully. What we feel for each other didn't compromise our work. It made our work better. The communities we serve know that. The data proves that. The results speak for themselves. Do they? Or are we just telling ourselves that because we want to believe our love story has a happy ending?" Connor was quiet for a moment, processing the question that cut to the heart of everything they'd built together. "There's only one way to find out," he said finally. "What do you mean?" Connor straightened in, and Elena saw something in his posture that reminded her of the man who'd been willing to fight his own family for principle. "We go upstairs, we face our team. We present the facts about what we've accomplished and then let them decide whether our relationship compromised our work or enhanced it." Elena felt a flutter of hope mixed with terror. "Connor, if they decide against us, then we accept their judgment and step down. But Elena, if they decide for us, if they say our partnership made the work stronger, then we fight this thing together. We defend what we've built and the communities depending on us." Elena studied his face, looking for doubt or false bravado. Instead, she found the quiet confidence that had drawn her to him from the beginning, the certainty that came from knowing you were fighting for something worth defending. "Okay," she said. Let's go face the music. They rode the elevator to the fifth floor in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When the doors opened, Elena was surprised to see their entire team gathered in the main work area. Engineers and lawyers and community organizers, all looking tense and worried, but not accusatory. Miguel was the first to speak. Hermana, we saw the news. We know what Reid Energy has been doing to you both. Elena felt tears threaten. Miguel, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to affect the work. If you think Connor and I should step down. Step down. Dr. Foster emerged from the crowd, her silver hair catching the morning light streaming through the windows. Elena, dear, why on earth would you step down for being the victim of corporate espionage? Because our relationship, your relationship, interrupted James Washington, their lead community organizer, is exactly why the Corpus Christi project succeeded. You two understand each other in a way that made the work possible. The community leaders I work with see that. They trust you because they see that you trust each other. The data doesn't lie, added Dr. Sarah Kim, their lead engineer. Every metric we track, environmental impact, economic benefits, community satisfaction improved after you two started working as true partners instead of reluctant collaborators. Elena looked around the room at faces she'd come to know and respect over the past months. These were people who'd left secure job to join an experimental initiative, who'd moved to Austin and taken pay cuts, and worked 18-hour days because they believed in the possibility of revolutionary change. So what do we do? Elena asked. The federal funding is under review. Our credibility is being questioned. The media wants to make this about romance instead of results. We do what we always do, Connor said, stepping forward to address the team. We let the work speak for itself. We present the data, defend the communities we serve, and prove that real partnerships can survive political attacks. And if the funding gets pulled, asked Maria Santos, their legal counsel. Miguel smiled, the expression carrying all the confidence of someone who'd grown up believing in impossible dreams. Then we build something better. We use the patents Connor transferred to the nonprofit. We work directly with communities. We prove that clean energy and environmental justice don't need Washington's permission. Elena felt something shift in the room, a collective recognition that they'd reached a moment of decision. They could retreat, apologize, try to separate their personal lives from their professional work. Or they could stand together, defend what they'd built, and fight for the communities depending on them. All in favor of telling Washington and Reid Energy Solutions exactly where they can shove their political games, Dr. Foster asked with a smile that could have powered their wind farm. Every hand in the room went up. Elena looked at Connor, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. They'd been manipulated, surveilled, set up for failure, but they'd also built something real love that made them stronger, work that changed lives, partnerships that transcended political divides. Okay then, Elena said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd finally stopped running from her own choices. Let's show them what real cooperation looks like. Outside, the media circus continued. But inside their Austin headquarters, 30 people who believed in the possibility of revolutionary change got back to work building the future one community at a time, together. 2 weeks after Rachel Chen's expose, Elena sat at a witness table in the Hart Senate office building facing a panel of senators who would decide the fate of everything she and Connor had built. The hearing room was packed with reporters, lobbyists, and representatives from the communities their initiative served. Camera flashes created a constant strobe effect that made Elena's head pound. Connor sat beside her wearing his best suit and the expression of a man who'd made peace with whatever judgment was coming. Behind them, Elena could see Miguel in the gallery, along with Dr. Foster James Washington and a dozen community leaders who'd flown to Washington at their own expense to support the initiative. Senator Morrison, now chairing the Energy Committee's investigation, gavelled the hearing to order. We're here today to examine allegations of conflicts of interest and ethical violations in the administration of the Clean Energy Transition Initiative. Ms. Vasquez, Mr. Reid, you stand accused of allowing personal relationships to compromise professional judgment in the distribution of federal funds. Elena leaned toward her microphone, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. Senator Morrison, with respect, that's not why we're here. We're here because powerful interests want to discredit clean energy technology by attacking the people who developed it. Mrs. Vasquez, are you suggesting this committee is part of some conspiracy? I'm suggesting that when a major oil corporation conducts illegal surveillance on American citizens, including a sitting senator's son, maybe the focus should be on the surveillance rather than the citizens. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Elena caught a glimpse of David Reid Sr. sitting in the front row, his face stone cold as he watched his son's testimony. Senator Hawkins leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but probing. Mr. Reid, can you explain how your personal relationship with Ms. Vasquez developed? When did professional collaboration become personal attraction? Connor straightened in his chair. Senator, I fell in love with Elena Vasquez because she's brilliant, dedicated, and willing to fight for communities that most people in power ignore. That love made me a better engineer, a better partner, and a better person. It didn't compromise our work, it elevated it. But surely you understand how the appearance of impropriety— Senator, Connor interrupted. The appearance of impropriety is exactly what my father's company was counting on. They documented our relationship not because it was corrupting our work, but because they knew people would assume it was. Elena felt a surge of pride at Connor's directness. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd grown into his role as a public advocate, learning to speak truth to power with the same precision he brought to engineering problems. Senator Morrison shuffled through his papers. Let's talk about results. Ms. Vasquez, the Corpus Christi pilot program, shows impressive environmental improvements, but critics argue these numbers are inflated due to your personal investment in proving the technology works. Elena had been preparing for this question for days. Senator, the environmental monitoring in Corpus Christi is conducted by 3 independent organizations: the EPA, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and the University of Texas Marine Science Institute. None of those organizations have any personal investment in our success. But the economic impact assessments were conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Elena's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd done her homework. Senator, every claim we've made about economic benefits has been verified by federal agencies that have no reason to favor our initiative. She pulled out a thick folder. I have letters here from community leaders in Corpus Christi, Port Arthur, and Beaumont. People who've lived with environmental damage for decades and are now seeing real improvement in air quality, water quality, and economic opportunity. They don't care about our personal relationship. They care about their children being able to breathe clean air. Elena began reading from the letter's testimonials from mothers whose children's asthma had improved from fishermen who were seeing healthier catches from workers who'd found better paying jobs with benefits and profit sharing. With each letter, the political abstractions of the hearing became human stories that no amount of surveillance or scandal could diminish. When she finished, the hearing room was quiet. Even Senator Morrison seemed affected by the testimonials. Senator Hawkins broke the silence. Ms. Vasquez, these are powerful stories, but the question remains, how do we know your personal relationship didn't influence your professional judgment in selecting these communities for pilot programs? Elena felt Connor's hand brush hers under the table, a subtle reminder that they were in this together. Senator, we didn't select these communities. They selected us. Every pilot program began with community leaders reaching out to us, asking for help with environmental problems that had been ignored for decades. And the profit-sharing agreements, the community ownership structures, whose idea were those? Mine, Connor said, based on models I'd studied in Costa Rica and Norway. Models that ensure environmental protection and economic development aren't competing interests, but complementary goals. Senator Morrison leaned back in his chair. Mr. Reid, your father's company has provided this committee with evidence that you transferred valuable patents to a nonprofit organization controlled by Ms. Vasquez's family. How do you explain that action? Connor's smile was sharp. I explain it as the best decision I ever made. Those patents are now being used to build clean energy infrastructure that benefits communities instead of enriching shareholders. Exactly as I intended. But the financial value. Senator, my brother killed himself because he thought our work was hurting people. I transferred those patents to ensure that my work would help people instead. If that's a crime, I'm guilty as charged. Elena watched David Reid Sr.'s face as Connor spoke about Michael. For just a moment, she saw something that might have been grief or regret crack through the older man's composure. The hearing continued for another 3 hours, with senators asking increasingly technical questions about environmental monitoring, economic modeling, and community engagement. Elena and Connor answered each query with data documentation and the quiet confidence of people who'd done the work they were defending. Finally, Senator Morrison called for a recess. The committee will deliberate and render its decision within 48 hours. As Elena and Connor gathered their papers, David Reid Sr. approached their table. Up close, Elena could see the resemblance between father and son, the same green eyes, the same strong jaw, the same stubborn set to the shoulders. Connor, David said, his voice formal but not hostile. You defended yourself well today. I defended the truth, Dad. There's a difference. David glanced at Elena, his expression unreadable. Ms. Vasquez, I owe you an apology. The surveillance was my decision, not the company's. I thought you were using my son to advance your political agenda. Elena studied the older man's face, looking for signs of manipulation or political calculation. Instead, she found something that looked like genuine remorse. Mr. Reid, your surveillance nearly destroyed everything we've built. It hurt your son and violated my privacy. Why should I believe this apology is sincere? David was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting between Connor and Elena. Because I watched you defend communities that my company helped poison. Because I saw you fight for my son when you could have thrown him under the bus to save yourself. Because, he paused, his voice catching slightly. Because you remind me of someone I used to love before I let money and power make me forget what mattered. Connor looked confused. Dad, what are you talking about? David's smile was hard and complicated. Your mother wasn't my first love, son. Before I met her, I was engaged to a woman named Maria Santos. She broke off our engagement because she said I cared more about oil profits than human costs. She was right. Elena felt the world tilt slightly. Maria Santos. My mother's name was Maria Santos Vasquez. I know. David's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I've been following your career since you graduated law school. When I realized you were Maria's daughter, when I saw you fighting the same fights she fought, I couldn't bear the thought of my son choosing someone like her over someone like us. Elena stared at this man who'd orchestrated months of surveillance and manipulation trying to process this final twist. You've been watching me for years because I remind you of a woman you lost to your own greed. I've been watching you because you represent everything I could have been if I'd made different choices. David looked at Connor with something that might have been pride. And because my son chose you, they know that he's a better man than I ever was. Connor was staring at his father with an expression Elena couldn't read. Dad, if you really mean that, if you really want to make amends, there's something you can do. What? Use Reid Energy's resources to support clean technology development instead of fighting it. Prove that oil companies can be part of the solution instead of just the problem. David was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what Connor was asking. Son, that would mean fundamentally changing how we do business. It would cost billions of dollars and decades of profits. It would also save lives and communities and maybe even the planet. Connor's voice was gentle but unwavering. It would honor Michael's memory by proving that energy companies can do better. Elena watched the two men face each other across decades of disagreement and disappointment, father and son separated by principle, but connected by love. She thought about her own mother, who died fighting the same fight Elena was fighting now, about the possibility that love could bridge even the deepest ideological divides. I'll consider it, David said finally. But Connor, even if I change Reid Energy's practices, it won't undo the damage I've done to your initiative. The political pressure, the congressional investigation, will survive, Elena said, surprising herself with her certainty. We'll survive because what we've built is stronger than politics, stronger than scandal, stronger than family drama or corporate manipulation. David smiled, and for a moment Elena could see the young man who'd once loved her mother enough to propose marriage. Maria would be proud of you, Elena, and she'd be proud of the man my son has become. As David Reid Sr. walked away, Elena felt something she hadn't expected: forgiveness. Not because David deserved it, but because holding on to anger was exhausting. Because love was more powerful than revenge. Because some fights were worth winning with grace instead of bitterness. Elena, Connor said quietly, are you okay? I know this is a lot to process. Elena looked at the man who'd become her partner in revolution, her ally in love, her co-conspirator in the fight for a better future. I'm better than okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Connor's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Even if we lose the congressional vote, even if we lose the federal funding, especially then, Elena said, because then we'll be free to build something even better. Elena woke on the morning of the committee vote to find Connor already awake sitting by the window of their hotel room, watching the sunrise over the Potomac River. They decided to stay together in Washington, partly for practical reasons, and partly because the idea of spending their last night before judgment alone felt unbearable. Any regrets? Connor asked without turning around. Elena padded to the window beside him, noting the way the morning light caught the monuments and government buildings that house the power to reshape their lives with a single vote. About what? Falling in love with you, fighting for clean energy, defending communities that needed defenders. About not taking the easy path, about not keeping things professional and safe. Elena considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been a respected environmental lawyer with a clear mission and uncomplicated enemies. Now she was the subject of congressional hearings, media speculation, and political manipulation. Her personal life was public knowledge. Her professional credibility was under attack, and her future was in the hands of politicians who might care more about perception than results. No regrets, she said finally. The easy path doesn't lead anywhere worth going. Connor's smile was soft with something that looked like wonder. How did I get so lucky? You gave up everything that was safe and predictable for the chance to do something that mattered. That's not luck. That's courage. They dressed in silence, both understanding the weight of the day ahead. Whatever the committee decided, their lives would change. Either they'd be vindicated and allowed to continue their work, or they'd be condemned and forced to start over. Either way, they'd face the consequences together. The hearing room was even more crowded than it had been 2 days earlier. Elena spotted reporters from every major news outlet, representatives from environmental groups and oil companies, and dozens of community leaders who traveled to Washington to hear the verdict. The gallery buzzed with nervous energy and whispered speculation. Senator Morrison called the hearing to order at exactly 10 a.m. The committee has deliberated extensively on the allegations against the Clean Energy Transition Initiative and its leadership. We've reviewed testimony, examined evidence, and consulted with experts in environmental law, ethics, and energy policy. Elena felt Connor's hand find hers under the table, warm and steady, despite the tremor she could feel in his fingers. Let me be clear, Morrison continued. This committee does not condone surveillance of American citizens by private corporations. Reid Energy Solutions' actions were inappropriate and possibly illegal, and we've referred that matter to the appropriate authorities. Elena felt a small surge of vindication, but she knew the real question was still coming. However, Morrison said, and Elena's heart sank, the committee must also address the central question of whether personal relationships compromise professional judgment in the administration of federal funds. The senator paused, consulting his notes. Elena noticed that he avoided looking directly at her and Connor, which she took as a bad sign. After extensive deliberation, the committee finds... Morrison paused again, and Elena wondered if he was enjoying the dramatic tension or simply dreading what he had to say next. The committee finds no evidence that personal relationships compromise the professional administration of the Clean Energy Transition Initiative. Elena felt the words hit her like a physical force. No evidence of compromise. They'd won. Furthermore, Morrison continued, the committee notes that the initiative has exceeded all performance benchmarks for environmental improvement, economic development, and community engagement. The pilot programs have created measurable benefits for the communities they serve, with results verified by multiple independent agencies. Elena heard cheering from the Yixu behind them, but she felt suspended in disbelief. After months of investigation, speculation, and political pressure, they'd been vindicated by the same committee that had seemed determined to destroy them. Senator Hawkins leaned forward to speak. Ms. Vasquez, Mr. Reid, while this committee clears you of ethical violations, I want to acknowledge the personal cost you've paid for your dedication to this work. You've endured surveillance, character assassination, and public scrutiny that no public servants should have to face. Elena found her voice. Senator, the personal cost was worth it. The communities we serve have faced environmental damage and economic neglect for decades. If our discomfort was the price of giving them hope, it was a bargain. Mr. Reid, Senator Morrison said, "What are your plans for the initiative moving forward?" Connor straightened in his chair. "Senator, we plan to expand the pilot programs to additional communities, continue developing clean technology solutions, and prove that environmental protection and economic development can be complementary goals rather than competing interests." And your personal relationship. How will you handle the ongoing scrutiny? Elena and Connor exchanged a look, a moment of silent communication that spoke to months of partnership and understanding. Senator Elena said, "Our personal relationship makes our professional work stronger, not weaker. We're better advocates, better leaders, and better public servants when we're working together than when we're working apart." Morrison nodded slowly. "Very well. The committee hereby approves the continuation of federal funding for the Clean Energy Transition Initiative with the recommendation that additional oversight be provided by independent monitoring agencies to ensure continued transparency." The hearing room erupted in cheers and applause. Elena felt Connor's arms around her, felt tears she hadn't realized she was crying, felt the overwhelming relief of vindication and the exhausting weight of months of pressure finally lifting from her shoulders. But even as she celebrated, Elena noticed that not everyone in the gallery was cheering. The oil industry representatives looked grim. The conservative think tank people were already on their phones, and several Republican senators were shaking their heads in obvious disagreement with the committee's decision. The fight wasn't over. It might never be over. But for today, for this moment, they'd won. As they left the hearing room, Elena and Connor were swarmed by reporters asking about their relationship, their plans, their reaction to the verdict. Elena let Connor field most of the questions while she tried to process what had just happened. "Ms. Vasquez," a reporter pushed through the crowd, "what do you say to critics who claim this decision proves Washington is corrupt, that personal relationships still influence policy decisions?" Elena stopped walking, turning to face the reporter and the cameras. "I'd say that real partnerships, professional and personal, make everything stronger. That love doesn't corrupt good work, it elevates it. And that anyone who thinks two people caring about each other somehow invalidates their commitment to serving communities has never experienced real partnership." "Oh, so you're confirming your romantic relationship?" Elena looked at Connor, seeing her own certainty reflected in his green eyes. "I'm confirming that Connor Reid is my partner in every sense of the word. Professional, personal, romantic, and all of it. And I'm proud of what we've built together." Connor stepped closer, slipping his arm around Elena's waist in a gesture that was both protective and declarative. "Elena and I are committed to each other and to the communities we serve. Those commitments aren't in conflict, they're mutually reinforcing." More questions followed, but Elena found herself tuning them out. The cameras, the reporters, the political implications, none of it seemed as important as the simple fact that she and Connor had survived the storm and come out stronger on the other side. As they finally escaped the media scrum and walked toward their hotel, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The possibility of a future that wasn't defined by crisis or controversy. A future where love and work could coexist without apology or explanation. "So what now?" Connor asked as they walked hand in hand down Pennsylvania Avenue. Elena smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Now we go back to Austin. We get back to work. We build more pilot programs, help more communities, and prove that real change is possible when people are willing to fight for it." "And us? What about us?" Elena stopped walking, turning to face the man who'd become her partner in revolution and her companion in love. "Us, Connor, we're just getting started." Connor's kiss was soft and certain and full of promise. When they broke apart, Elena saw their future spread out before them like a map of uncharted territory full of possibility and challenge, and the kind of love that could change the world. 3 months after their congressional vindication, Elena stood in the executive conference room of Reid Energy Solutions, a place she'd never imagined visiting voluntarily. The walls were lined with photographs of oil rigs and drilling platforms, monuments to decades of environmental destruction that made her skin crawl. But today, those same walls would witness something unprecedented, a complete corporate transformation. Connor sat beside her at the massive mahogany table reviewing technical specifications with the same intensity he brought to all his work. Across from them, David Reid Sr. looked older and more subdued than Elena remembered, flanked by a team of engineers and lawyers who seemed as bewildered as Elena felt by the surreal nature of the meeting. The retrofitting timeline is aggressive but feasible. Connor was saying, his finger tracing across blueprints that showed how Reid Energy's existing facilities could be transformed with clean extraction technology. Phase 1 installations can begin within 6 months at the Beaumont and Port Arthur refineries. Full implementation across all domestic operations within 3 years. Whilst David studied the plans with the focus of a man trying to understand a foreign language and the economic projections, Elena opened her laptop, pulling up financial models that Miguel had helped her prepare. Initial investment of $12 billion over 3 years with break-even achieved by year 5. Long-term projections show increased profitability due to reduced regulatory compliance costs, improved community relations, and access to emerging clean energy markets. $12 billion. David's voice was flat. That's nearly half our current market value. Dad, Connor said gently, it's also an investment in the future, in communities that have been damaged by our industry for decades, in technology that could revolutionize energy production worldwide. Elena watched the interaction between father and son, noting the way Connor had learned to speak to David in the language of business while maintaining his environmental principles. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had evolved from antagonistic to cautiously collaborative, built on shared grief for Michael and a growing recognition that they wanted similar outcomes through different methods. Ms. Vasquez, David said, turning his attention to Elena, I understand the environmental benefits of this transition. What I don't understand is why you're willing to work with Reid Energy after everything we've put you through. Elena had been asking herself the same question since Connor first proposed this partnership. Working with the company that had surveilled her, attempted to destroy her credibility, and contributed to the pollution that killed her mother, felt like a betrayal of everything she'd fought for. Because results matter more than revenge, Elena said finally. Because if Reid Energy really commits to clean extraction and community ownership, it could transform the entire industry. Because sometimes the best way to defeat your enemies is to turn them into allies. David's smile was rueful. Your mother said something similar to me once, about the power of transformation over destruction. Elena felt the familiar ache that came with mentions of her mother. You really knew her well. Well enough to recognize her daughter. David's expression grew serious. Elena, I want you to know that my decision to transform Reid Energy isn't just about guilt or nostalgia. It's about recognizing that the old way of doing business is unsustainable, environmentally, economically, morally. And if the transformation fails, if clean extraction proves too expensive or technically challenging. David was quiet for a moment, consulting notes that suggested he had been thinking about this question for weeks. Then Reid Energy will become a different kind of company. Smaller perhaps, more focused on community partnerships than maximum extraction, but honest about our environmental impact and committed to doing better. Connor looked up from the technical specifications. Dad, are you saying you'd rather run a smaller clean energy company than a larger dirty one? I'm saying I'd rather leave my sons a legacy they can be proud of than a fortune they're ashamed of. David's voice carried a weight Elena hadn't heard before. Michael died believing our work was harmful. I won't let that be his epitaph. Elena felt something shift in her understanding of David Reid Sr. For months, she'd seen him as a villain, motivated by greed and power. But the man sitting across from her seemed driven by grief and a desperate desire for redemption. Okay, Elena said, let's talk specifics. Community ownership structures, profit-sharing agreements, and environmental oversight mechanisms. They spent the next 4 hours negotiating the details of what would become the largest voluntary corporate environmental transformation in American history. Elena insisted on community ownership percentages that would give local residents real decision-making power. Connor designed technical specifications that would exceed federal environmental standards. David committed to transparency measures that would make Reid Energy's environmental impact publicly accessible in real time. By the end of the meeting, they'd outlined a framework that was ambitious, expensive, and revolutionary. If successful, it would prove that major corporations could prioritize environmental health without sacrificing economic viability. If it failed, it would destroy Reid Energy and discredit the clean energy movement for decades. "There's one more thing," David said as they prepared to leave. "I want to establish a memorial fund in Michael's name for families affected by environmental damage caused by energy extraction. Elena, I'd like you to administer it." Elena stared at the man who'd spent months trying to destroy her career. "Mr. Reid, I don't think that's appropriate. The fund should be managed independently." "It will be. I'm asking you to serve on the board along with community representatives and environmental experts. Not as a Reid Energy employee, but as an advocate for the communities we've harmed." Elena looked at Connor, seeing encouragement in his expression. "What would be the fund's mission?" "Healthcare for families dealing with pollution-related illnesses. Education scholarships for children in affected communities. Legal support for environmental justice cases." David's voice was steady but emotional. Everything Maria wanted when she was fighting for her neighbors. Everything she would have done if she'd lived longer. Elena felt tears threaten. The idea of David Reid Sr. honoring her mother's memory through environmental justice work was almost too surreal to process. "I need time to think about it." "Of course, but Elena, I hope you'll consider it." Michael and Maria both died believing that energy companies were irredeemably corrupt. "I want to prove them wrong." As they left Reid Energy's headquarters, Elena felt like she was walking out of an alternate universe where villains became heroes and enemies became allies. The late afternoon Austin sun felt surreal after hours in corporate conference rooms, and she found herself questioning whether the morning's agreements were real or simply elaborate theater. "Connor," she said as they walked to their car, "tell me I didn't just agree to partner with the company that killed my mother." Connor stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression that was serious but hopeful. "You agreed to partner with a company that's committed to making sure no one else's mother dies the way yours did. There's a difference. Is there, or are we being naive about corporate promises and good intentions?" Connor was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same analytical approach he brought to engineering problems. "Elena, 3 years ago, I would have said you were being naive. But I've watched my father struggle with guilt about Michael's death, about the environmental damage Reid Energy has caused, about the relationship he lost with your mother decades ago. His commitment to transformation isn't just business strategy, it's personal redemption." Elena studied Connor's face, looking for signs of wishful thinking or family loyalty that might be clouding his judgment. Instead, she found the same careful analysis that had made her trust his technical assessments from the beginning. "And if you're wrong, if this is just elaborate public relations designed to rehabilitate Reid Energy's image while maintaining destructive practices?" Connor's smile was rueful. "Then we'll expose the deception and destroy them more thoroughly than any lawsuit ever could. Elena, we're not going into this partnership blind. We're building in oversight mechanisms, community controls, and transparency requirements that will make it impossible for Reid Energy to revert to old practices without public exposure." Elena felt some of her tension ease. Connor was right, they weren't trusting David Reid Sr.'s good intentions. They were creating structural safeguards that would ensure accountability regardless of individual motivations. "Okay," she said finally, "let's transform an oil company." Connor's kiss was quick but intense, full of the excitement of someone who just committed to an impossible dream. "Elena, if this works, if we really can prove that major corporations can prioritize environmental health, it changes everything. Not just for Reid Energy, but for the entire industry." Elena looked back at the Reid Energy building, its glass and steel facade reflecting the Austin skyline where she'd grown up believing in clear lines between good and evil. Now those lines were blurring in ways that terrified and exhilarated her. "Connor," she said, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. If I start caring more about corporate transformation than community protection, if I lose sight of the people we're supposed to be serving, you'll remind me why we started this fight." Connor's expression grew serious. "Elena, the day you stop caring about communities is the day I know you're not the woman I fell in love with. But I don't think that's going to happen. Your mother's daughter doesn't forget where she came from." As they drove back toward their headquarters, Elena felt like she was navigating uncharted territory where former enemies could become allies and love could survive the most unlikely partnerships. She thought about her mother who died fighting the same companies Elena was now trying to transform, about the possibility that redemption was stronger than revenge, that healing was more powerful than hatred. Tomorrow they'd begin the complex work of turning an oil giant into an environmental ally. But tonight, Elena allowed herself to hope that some transformations were possible, even the ones that seemed too good to be true. 6 months after their partnership with Reid Energy began, Elena stood on the observation deck of the newly retrofitted Corpus Christi facility, watching the sun set over the Gulf of Mexico through air that was cleaner than it had been in decades. Below, the transformed refinery hummed with the quiet efficiency of Connor's latest technological innovations, carbon capture systems that turned emissions into useful materials, water treatment processes that returned cleaner liquid to the environment than they took out, and solar panels that supplemented traditional energy production with renewable sources. The atmospheric readings are even better than our projections, Connor said, joining her at the railing with 2 cups of coffee and the satisfied expression of an engineer whose designs were working exactly as intended. Particulate matter is down 97% from pre-retrofit levels. Water quality has improved by 85%. And the economic impact. Elena smiled, recognizing the tone Connor got when he was about to launch into statistics that proved their work was succeeding beyond their wildest hopes. Let me guess, more jobs, higher wages, better benefits, community ownership percentages that would make capitalism blush. All of that. Connor set down his coffee and pulled out his tablet, unable to resist showing her the latest data. But Elena, look at this. The health metrics from the local hospital show a 30% reduction in respiratory ailments, a 40% decrease in skin conditions related to chemical exposure, and the first year-over-year improvement in childhood asthma rates in 20 years. Elena studied the charts and graphs that translated their work into human terms: children who could breathe easier, families who didn't have to choose between economic survival and environmental health, communities that were thriving instead of merely surviving. Connor, we actually did it. We proved that environmental protection and economic development aren't opposing forces. We did more than that. Connor pocketed the tablet and turned to face her fully. We proved that love makes everything stronger. That partnership across ideological divides is possible. That two people who care about each other can change the world. Elena felt the familiar flutter in her chest that Connor's words always triggered, even after months of being together publicly and privately. Their relationship had survived congressional hearings, media scrutiny, and the ongoing skepticism of people who believed that personal and professional partnerships were inherently corrupting. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Elena asked, reaching up to straighten Connor's arm, a gesture that had become automatic after dozens of public appearances together. Only every day, but I don't mind hearing it again. Elena was about to respond when her phone buzzed with a text message. The sender was Rebecca Walsh from the Department of Energy. Turn on CNN, breaking news about Reid Energy Solutions. Elena and Connor found a television in the facility's break room, joining a handful of engineers and community liaisons who were watching the news with expressions of surprise and confusion. In an unprecedented move, the CNN anchor was saying, Reid Energy Solutions announced today that it will be transitioning all of its domestic operations to clean extraction technology over the next 3 years. The company's CEO, David Reid Sr., says the decision represents the largest voluntary corporate environmental transformation in American history. The screen cut to footage of David Reid Sr. standing at a podium, looking older but more determined than Elena remembered from their partnership negotiations. Reid Energy Solutions has spent decades extracting resources from American communities without adequately considering the environmental and health costs of our operations. That changes today. Elena felt Connor tense beside her as his father continued speaking. My son Connor has developed clean extraction technology that can reduce emissions by over 90% while maintaining economic viability. Reid Energy Solutions will be implementing this technology across all domestic facilities. Furthermore, we'll be establishing community ownership partnerships that ensure local residents share in the profits from energy development on their land. The camera shifted to show a reporter asking questions about the economic implications of such a massive transformation. David's answers were measured, professional, and completely sincere, the voice of a man who'd found his purpose after decades of moral drift. Holy shit! whispered one of the engineers. Connor's dad just committed to transforming the entire company using our model. Connor was staring at the television with an expression Elena couldn't read. I need to call him. Connor, wait. Elena caught his arm. Are you okay? This is huge, but it's also completely unexpected, potentially world-changing, possibly the vindication of everything we've worked for. Connor's smile was wondering. Yeah, all of that occurred to me too. They stepped outside for privacy while Connor dialed his father's number. Elena listened to Connor's side of a conversation that seemed to involve a lot of careful questions and surprised laughter. Dad, when you said you'd consider transformation, I thought you meant gradual implementation over a decade, Connor said finally. Not a complete corporate overhaul announced on national television. Elena couldn't hear David's response, but she could see Connor's expression soften as his father spoke. Because of the memorial fund, Connor's voice carried surprise and something that might have been pride. Dad, Elena's work with environmental justice communities influenced this decision. Another long pause. I know she reminds you of Maria, but Dad, Elena isn't responsible for healing your relationship with the past. She's building her own future. Connor glanced at Elena, his expression complicated. Though I'm glad her work inspired you to make the right choice. Elena felt her cheeks warm. The idea that her advocacy work had helped convince David Reid to transform his entire company was both humbling and overwhelming. No, I understand that, Connor continued, and I'm proud of you for making the change, regardless of your motivations. But Dad, if you're serious about this, if you really want Reid Energy to become an environmental leader, you have to commit to full transparency. Every facility, every process, every environmental impact must be publicly accessible. Elena watched Connor negotiate with his father about corporate policy and environmental accountability, seeing a side of him she'd never witnessed before: the oil executive's son, who understood how to speak the language of business while maintaining his environmental principles. Okay, Connor said finally, I'll work with your implementation team. But Dad, if this transformation succeeds, if Reid Energy really becomes a model for corporate environmental responsibility, it's going to change everything. Not just for our family, but for the entire energy industry. Elena couldn't hear David's response, but Connor's expression suggested it was both grateful and determined. I love you too, Dad, and I think Michael would be proud of both of us. Connor hung up and turned to Elena, his expression mixing hope with amazement. He says the board approved the transformation unanimously. Says the pilot programs we've implemented have proven that clean extraction is not only environmentally responsible but more profitable long-term than traditional methods. And you believe him? Connor was quiet for a moment, watching pelicans dive for fish in the cleaner waters of the Gulf. I believe he's finally found a way to honor Michael's memory while building something worthy of the Reid family name. Whether that's enough to sustain such a massive transformation, we'll see. Elena studied Connor's profile, noting the way his jaw relaxed when he talked about his father's redemption. Connor, how do you feel about your family company becoming a clean energy leader? I know you transferred the patent specifically to prevent Reid Energy from profiting from your work. I feel like the universe has a sense of justice. Connor's smile was complicated but genuine. But Elena, if my father really does transform Reid Energy into a clean energy company with full community ownership, it could revolutionize the entire industry. Other oil companies would have to follow suit or be left behind economically and politically. Elena felt a flutter of possibility. Connor, if Reid Energy really commits to clean extraction and community ownership across all their operations, it would mean implementing our model on a scale we never imagined possible. Connor's voice carried a note of wonder. Instead of working with dozens of communities, we could be working with hundreds. Instead of proving clean energy works in pilot programs, we could be proving it works industry-wide, which would mean demonstrating that environmental justice and economic development can coexist on a national scale. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been invisible through the pollution that used to cloud this stretch of coastline. Elena, Connor said finally, there's something I need to ask you. Something in his tone made Elena turn to look at him fully. Connor's expression was nervous but determined, the look of a man who'd made a decision and was committed to seeing it through. We've been partners for over a year now, Professional partners, personal partners, partners in revolution and love, and the fight for a better future. Connor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I want us to be partners for life. Elena felt her breath catch as Connor dropped to one knee on the observation deck of their newest facility with the Gulf of Mexico spread out behind him and the sound of clean energy technology humming in the background. Elena Vasquez, Connor said, opening the box to reveal a ring that caught the sunset light like captured fire. Will you marry me? Elena stared at the ring, not a traditional diamond, but a stone that looked like compressed carbon, beautiful and unique, and perfectly symbolic of their work together. Connor, is that a diamond created from carbon captured by our clean extraction technology? The first gem produced by environmental restoration instead of environmental destruction. Connor's smile was nervous but hopeful. Miguel helped me design the setting. He said your grandmother would have approved of jewelry that told a story. Elena felt tears blur her vision as she looked at the man who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. The engineer who'd given up his family fortune for principle. The advocate who'd fought congressional hearings for the communities they served. The lover who'd made her believe that personal and professional partnerships could strengthen each other instead of competing. Yes, she said, pulling Connor to his feet and kissing him as the sun set over water that was cleaner than it had been in generations. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. Connor slipped the ring onto her finger and Elena marveled at how it caught the light, a perfect symbol of their work together. Beautiful because it had been created from transformation rather than extraction. Valuable because it represented hope instead of destruction. As they kissed on the observation deck of their newest facility, Elena felt like she was living in a story she could never have imagined 2 years ago. A story about love that survived political pressure, about partnerships that transcended ideological differences, about the possibility that two people who cared about each other could actually change the world. Behind them, the clean energy facility hummed with quiet efficiency, processing resources in ways that healed instead of harmed. Above them, stars were becoming visible in a sky that was clearer than it had been in decades. And around them, communities were thriving in ways that proved environmental protection and economic development could be complementary goals instead of competing interests. Lena looked at the ring on her finger, at the man who'd become her partner in revolution, at the future they were building together, one community at a time. 2 years ago, she'd been afraid that love would compromise her principles. Now she knew that love had strengthened every principle she'd ever held. So what now? Connor asked, echoing the question he'd posed after their congressional vindication. Elena smiled, feeling like she was standing at the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life. Now we plan a wedding. Now we expand to more communities. Now we prove that love and work and revolution can all happen at the same time. Any regrets? Connor asked, repeating the question that had become their private ritual. Elena looked at her engagement ring, at the man who'd given it to her, at the clean energy facility that hummed with the sound of technology that could save the world. Only that it took us so long to find each other. 1 year later, Elena woke on her wedding morning to find Austin's September air crisp with the promise of autumn and the sound of mariachi music drifting through her apartment windows. Miguel had hired the band as a surprise, claiming that their grandmother's spirit would never forgive them if Elena got married without proper Mexican celebration. She padded to the window to see her neighbors setting up tables in the courtyard of her apartment complex, transforming the space where she'd lived alone for 5 years into a community gathering that would have made her mother proud. Mrs. Garcia was directing the placement of papel picado while her husband tuned his guitar. The Nguyen family was arranging flowers they'd grown in their rooftop garden. Children were running between the tables, their laughter mixing with the music in a symphony of celebration. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Connor. I'm not supposed to see you before the ceremony, but I can hear the music from my house. Your brother throws a better pre-wedding party than most people throw for the actual wedding. She typed back, wait until you see what he has planned for the reception. Miguel's been planning this for months. I think he's more excited about the party than we are about getting married. Impossible. I've been excited about marrying you since the day I met you. I just didn't know it at the time. Elena smiled, feeling the familiar flutter that Connor's words always triggered. In 6 hours, she would officially become Elena Vasquez Reid, though she'd been Connor's partner in every meaningful sense for over a year. The wedding was more celebration than legal necessity, a chance to make public promises they'd already been living privately. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Sofia Martinez standing in the hallway holding a garment bag and wearing the expression of someone who'd traveled a long distance to deliver important news. Sofia? Elena felt a mix of surprise and apprehension. Her former mentor had been supportive but distant since Elena left the environmental law clinic, maintaining professional courtesy while making it clear she still had reservations about Elena's choices. "May I come in? I have something for you. Something I should have given you months ago." Elena stepped aside, noting that Sofia looked older and more tired than she remembered. "How did you know where I live?" "Miguel invited me. He said there was something you needed to hear before you got married." Sofia hung the garment bag on Elena's closet door. "That's your grandmother's wedding dress. Miguel thought you might want to wear it." Elena stared at the garment bag, her throat tight with emotion. "Sofia, I don't understand. Why would you—" "Because I owe you an apology, and because your grandmother asked me to give you this dress when you found the right man to marry." Elena felt the world tilt slightly. "You knew my grandmother." Sofia's smile was fun and complicated. "Elena, your grandmother Carmen was my law school roommate. She's the one who encouraged me to go into environmental law. She's also the one who told me to watch out for her granddaughter when you started practicing." Elena sank into her kitchen chair trying to process this information. "You've been watching out for me because my grandmother asked you to—" "I've been watching out for you because you remind me of her. And because she made me promise to help you find the balance between fighting for justice and fighting for love." Sofia sat across from Elena at the small kitchen table where Elena had eaten countless solitary meals, planning legal strategies and nursing her anger at the world's injustices. "Your grandmother knew about Connor's family," Sofia continued. "She knew about David Reid Sr.'s relationship with your mother. She also knew that sometimes the children of our enemies become our greatest allies." Elena felt like she was hearing the final pieces of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve for her entire adult life. "Sofia, why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you needed to find your own way to Connor. You needed to choose love over ideology, partnership over purity, hope over anger. If I'd told you what your grandmother believed, that love could transform enemies into allies, you might have thought you were fulfilling someone else's destiny instead of creating your own." Elena looked out her apartment window at the community celebration taking shape in the courtyard, at the neighbors who'd become friends, at the life she'd built in the space between activism and love. "Sofia, when I left the clinic to work with Connor, you said I was compromising my principles. I said that because I was afraid you were making the same mistakes I'd made." Sofia's voice was soft with regret. "I chose ideological purity over partnership. I chose being right over being effective. I spent 40 years fighting the same fights without ever considering that some battles are won through alliance rather than opposition." Elena felt tears threaten. "And now I watch you transform entire industries through partnership. I see you build clean energy infrastructure that actually helps communities instead of just criticizing the infrastructure that harms them. I watch you prove that love and work can strengthen each other." Sofia's smile was proud and wondering. "Elena, you've accomplished more in 2 years of collaboration than I accomplished in 4 decades of opposition." Elena reached across the table to take Sofia's hand. "You taught me how to fight for justice. Everything I've accomplished is built on the foundation you gave me. I taught you how to identify injustice. Connor taught you how to create justice. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the mariachi music and children's laughter drifting through the window. "Sofia," Elena said finally, "will you stay for the wedding? I know it's not your thing, but—" "Elena, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Your grandmother made me promise to be there when you married the right man." Sofia's smile was mischievous. "She also made me promise to make sure you didn't trip walking down the aisle." Elena laughed, feeling like missing pieces of her history were finally falling into place. "Did she really think I'd marry Connor someday? She thought you'd marry someone who challenged you to be better than you thought possible. Someone who saw your work as strengthening theirs instead of competing with it. Someone who loved you enough to fight for the world you both wanted to create." Sophia stood gathering her purse. She would have been proud of the woman you've become, Elena, and proud of the man you chose to become her with. After Sophia left, Elena carefully unzipped the garment bag to reveal her grandmother's wedding dress, white silk with delicate embroidery, and a cut that spoke to timeless elegance rather than contemporary fashion. As she held it up to the light, Elena felt connected to generations of women who'd fought for love and justice, who'd found ways to balance personal happiness with public service. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting 60 years for Elena to grow into it. In the mirror, she saw echoes of her grandmother's wedding photographs, but also something uniquely her own, the confidence of a woman who'd learned to trust her choices, to believe in partnership, to fight for love without sacrificing principle. Her phone buzzed with another text from Connor. Miguel says I'm not allowed to see you until the ceremony, but I wanted you to know that my father is here. He brought your mother's letters. Elena stared at the message, her heart racing. What letters? The ones she wrote to him before they broke up. He thought you might want to read them before you get married, before you become part of the Reid family officially. Elena felt like the universe was conspiring to give her the full story of her family's history on the day she was creating her own chapter of it. Where is he, Frater? In the courtyard. Miguel put him to work hanging papel picado. Apparently your brother believes in rehabilitation through party planning. Elena smiled, imagining David Reid Sr. trying to navigate Miguel's enthusiastic wedding preparations. Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. She found David Reid Sr. exactly where Connor had said he'd be, standing on a ladder, while Miguel directed him in the hanging of colorful paper banners. The oil executive looked completely out of place, but surprisingly content following Miguel's instructions, with the patience of a man who'd learned to take direction from people who knew better than he did. Mr. Reid, Elena said, and he turned to look at her with an expression that might have been awe. Lena. David climbed down from the ladder carefully, his movements showing his age. You look beautiful. You look exactly like your mother did when she was your age. Elena felt her throat tighten. Connor said you brought letters. David reached into his jacket and withdrew a bundle of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon. Maria wrote to me for about 6 months after our engagement ended. I should have returned them to her family when she died, but he paused, his voice catching. They were all I had left of the person I could have been. Elena accepted the letters with trembling hands, noting her mother's careful handwriting on the envelopes. Mr. Reid, why are you giving these to me now? Because today you're becoming my daughter-in-law. Because you have a right to know the full story of why your mother left me and what she hoped I would become. David's smile was sad but genuine. And because those letters contain the blueprint for everything your mother believed about environmental justice, community partnership, and the possibility of redemption. Elena looked at the letters at the man who'd loved her mother and lost her to his own choices at the community celebrations surrounding them. Mr. Reid, what did she write about? About the communities we could have served together. About the technology we could have developed to heal instead of harm. About the kind of partnership that could bridge any divide if both people were committed to the same values. David's voice was soft with memory. About love that could transform the world if people were brave enough to choose it over comfort. Elena felt tears blur her vision. She wrote about partnership across ideological differences. She wrote about the future you and Connor are building. 40 years before either of you was born, your mother envisioned exactly the kind of work you're doing now. David's smile was proud. Elena, you are not just following in her footsteps, you're fulfilling her prophecy. Elena hugged the letters to her chest, feeling connected to her mother in a way she hadn't experienced since Maria's death. Mr. Reid, thank you for bringing these, for transforming your company, for giving Connor the space to become the man he is. And thank you for showing my son what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. And Elena, David's expression grew serious. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. But more than that, she'd be proud of the world you're helping to create. As David walked back toward the ladder in Miguel's enthusiastic direction, Elena felt like she was holding the missing piece of her family's story. The letters would wait until after the wedding. This was a day for celebration, not sadness. But knowing they existed, knowing her mother had dreamed of exactly the kind of partnership Elena had found with Connor, felt like a blessing from beyond. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation and celebration. Miguel orchestrated the transformation of the apartment complex courtyard, into a wedding venue that mixed Mexican tradition with clean energy innovation. Solar panels hidden among the decorations, flowers grown in soil, remediated by their technology music, powered by wind generators, Connor had designed as wedding gifts. At 3 p.m., Elena walked down an aisle lined with representatives from every community. Their initiative had served, wearing her grandmother's dress and carrying her mother's letters in her bouquet. Connor stood at the altar wearing a suit Miguel had designed and an expression of wonder that suggested he still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Dr. Foster officiated the ceremony, weaving together readings from environmental science, Mexican poetry, and letters the couple had written to each other during their darkest moments of doubt. When she pronounced them husband and wife, the applause from the assembled community was loud enough to be heard 3 blocks away. As Elena and Connor kissed for the first time as a married couple, she felt like she was living the culmination of stories that had begun before either of them was born: her mother's fight for environmental justice, her grandmother's belief in transformative love, Connor's family's long journey toward redemption. The reception that followed was everything Miguel had promised, and in more mariachi music mixed with speeches from community leaders, traditional Mexican food served alongside local Austin favorites, dancing that continued long past sunset under lights powered by clean energy technology. But the moment Elena treasured most came late in the evening, when she and Connor slipped away from the party room to read her mother's letters together on the apartment building's rooftop. Under stars that were visible through Austin's cleaner air, they discovered Maria Santos's dreams for environmental partnership, community ownership, and love that could bridge any divide. "Elena," Connor said after reading the final letter, "your mother wasn't just fighting against environmental damage. She was fighting for the kind of future we're building together." Elena leaned against her new husband, feeling the weight of history and the lightness of possibility. "Connor, do you think she would have approved of us?" Connor's smile was soft in the starlight. "I think she would have said we took too long to find each other." As they sat on the rooftop of the building where Elena had lived alone, surrounded by the sounds of their wedding celebration and the hum of clean energy technology, Elena felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She'd spent years fighting against the forces that had killed her mother. Now she was building the future her mother had dreamed of with the man who'd taught her that love could strengthen every fight worth fighting. "Mrs. Vasquez Reid," Connor said, testing out her new name with obvious pleasure. "Mr. Vasquez Reid," Elena replied, making Connor laugh with surprise. "You want me to take your name?" "I want us to share everything," Elena said. "Names work, dreams, battles, victories, all of it." Connor's kiss was soft and certain and full of promise. When they broke apart, Elena saw their future spread out before them like a map of uncharted territory, communities to serve, technology to develop, love to build, and the kind of partnership that could change everything. Tomorrow they'd return to the work of transformation, helping more communities, expanding clean energy infrastructure, proving that environmental protection and economic development could coexist. But tonight, in the clean air of Austin, with the sound of celebration drifting up from below, Elena and Connor were exactly where they belonged. Together, building the future one partnership at a time. 5 years later, Elena stood in the observation tower of the newest Clean Energy Innovation Center, watching the sunrise paint the Austin skyline in shades of gold and pink. 5 years after their wedding, the city looked different. Cleaner air revealed details that had been hidden by pollution, solar panels and wind generators. Dotted rooftops throughout the downtown area, and the Colorado River ran clearer than it had in decades. "The quarterly reports just came in," Connor said, joining her with coffee and the satisfied expression of someone whose wildest dreams had become measurable reality. 67 facilities across 15 states, all operating at or above environmental standards. Community ownership averaging 42%, employment up 38% from pre-retrofit levels. Elena smiled, accepting the coffee and noting the way Connor still got excited about data that proved their work was succeeding. And the health metrics: respiratory ailments down 55% in served communities. Childhood asthma rates improved in every location. 3 communities have been removed from the EPA's Environmental Justice Watch list for the first time in 40 years. Elena studied the charts Connor showed her, each number representing lives improved, families protected, communities thriving. "Connor, we actually did it. We proved that industrial transformation was possible." "We did more than that." Connor wrapped his arms around her from behind both of them, looking out over the city where they had fallen in love. We prove that the future doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. That love can be a revolutionary force. Elena leaned back against her husband, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of 5 years of partnership that had only grown stronger with time. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Only every day. But I never get tired of hearing it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Austin wake up in air that was cleaner than it had been in generations. The Clean Energy Innovation Center hummed quietly around them, their latest project, a research facility, where engineers and community organizers worked together to develop technology that served environmental and economic goals simultaneously. Elena Byram, Connor said finally, there's something I need to tell you. Something in his tone made Elena turn in his arms to look at him fully. Connor's expression was nervous but excited, the look of someone with important news. The Reid energy transformation is complete. Every domestic facility converted to clean extraction, every community partnership finalized. My father called this morning to announce that Reid Energy Solutions is officially carbon neutral as of today. Elena felt her breath catch. Connor, that's incredible. That means That means the largest oil company in Texas is now a clean energy company. That means other corporations will have to follow suit or be left behind economically. That means the model we developed in Austin is now operating at national scale. Elena stared at her husband, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling her. When they'd started their partnership 5 years ago, transforming a single community had seemed like an impossible dream. Now they were transforming entire industries. Connor, what does this mean for us, for our work? Connor's smile was bright with possibility. It means we get to choose what comes next. We've proven that corporate transformation is possible. We've shown that environmental protection and economic development can coexist. We've built a model that's being replicated across the country. Elena felt a flutter of anticipation. So what do we choose? We choose to keep building. We choose to expand internationally. We choose to prove that the future can be better than the past. Connor paused, his expression growing tender. And we choose to build a family that can inherit the world we're creating instead of the world we were born into. Elena felt her heart stop. Connor, are you saying? I'm saying I want to have children with you. I want to raise them in communities with clean air and good jobs. I want to teach them that love and work can strengthen each other. That partnership is more powerful than opposition. That two people who care about each other really can change the world. Elena looked into her husband's green eyes and saw their future reflected there, not just the professional accomplishments and environmental victories, but the personal joy of building a family together. Children who would grow up in a world where clean energy was normal, where community ownership was standard, where love across ideological differences was celebrated instead of scandalized. Yes, she whispered, pulling Connor closer and kissing him as the sun rose over the city they'd helped transform. Yes to all of it. Yes to building a family, yes to expanding globally, yes to proving that love is the most revolutionary force in the universe. As they kissed in the observation tower of their latest facility, Elena felt like she was living the epilogue of a story that had begun with anger and ended with hope. A story about two people who'd found each other across ideological divides, who'd learned that partnership could be stronger than opposition, who'd proven that love could literally change the world. Behind them, the Clean Energy Innovation Center hummed with the work of engineers and community organizers building tomorrow's technology. Below them, Austin thrived in ways that honored both economic development and environmental protection. Around them, the future spread out like a promise waiting to be kept. Elena thought about her mother who died fighting for clean air and never lived to see her daughter breathing it freely, about her grandmother who'd believed in love that could transform enemies into allies, about Connor's brother Michael who died believing that change was impossible and never saw how possible it actually was. Elena, Connor said, his voice soft with wonder, do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd never met, if we'd stayed enemies instead of becoming partners? Elena considered the question, imagining a world where she'd continued fighting oil companies from the outside while Connor tried to reform them from within. A world where love had never taught them that collaboration could be more powerful than opposition. I think we would have spent our lives fighting the same battles without ever realizing we were fighting for the same thing, Elena said finally. I think we would have been lonely and angry and convinced that change was impossible. And instead, Elena smiled, looking at the ring on her finger, still the compressed carbon diamond Connor had proposed with now worn smooth by 5 years of partnership in every sense of the word. Instead, we proved that love is the ultimate renewable resource, that it gets stronger with use instead of depleted, that it can power anything if you're brave enough to let it. Connor's kiss was soft and certain and full of promise. When they broke apart, Elena saw their future stretching ahead, children to raise, communities to serve, technology to develop, and love to build. The kind of future her mother had dreamed of, her grandmother had believed in, and Elena and Connor had made real through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing each other. As they walked back toward their offices, hand in hand, Elena felt something she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it: the perfect balance between love and work, between personal happiness and public service, between fighting against the world as it was and building the world as it could be. Tomorrow they'd face new challenges, new communities to serve, new technology to develop, new battles to fight. But today, in the clean air of Austin, with the sound of revolutionary technology humming in the background, Elena and Connor Vasquez Reid were exactly where they belonged. Together, building the future, one partnership at a time. The end.